Mic check. Okay, yeah, pro streamer needs to remember to plug their microphones back in. Why do I always do this? Oh boy. All right, so everybody, welcome on back into another stream. One where I don't break through the tradition of unmuting the microphone. Well, all right, so long story short with the microphone and stuff, I was messing around with trying to make the PlayStation TV work, and I need to like buy a certain kind of splitter for me to be able to like stream footage of it directly onto the interwebs. So yeah, I just had to like unplug some stuff to test that out. So I forgot I unplugged the mic to do that. So definitely my mistake there. And thank you guys for letting me know that as per tradition, I was muted. So anyway, Zach Barker, welcome in. Vacuous Zealot, nice to see you. Jay and Mercy, welcome on into the stream. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, and then Happy Festivus for the rest of us, if you are choosing to celebrate any of those. And for everybody else, just welcome in. So today we have some absolute bangers of some videos that we're going to go through. The first one will be by Nakey Jakey. I've watched a couple videos by him. He's always had some really interesting, well-edited videos here. The first one is FromSoftware's Game Design Changed Everything. And then next we have the best Zelda game I've ever played by Moxie Watts, whom I've become more acquainted with very recently. She just kind of recently forayed into creating Elden Ring content, and she was primarily like a Zelda lore hunter for a very long time, and so she's making that transition now. And then after this one, we will look at one of her actual like full-on lore videos, Elden Ring lore Melina as Empyrean, wear headphones. I have headphones, hopefully you guys do as well. And then I'll look at Understanding Queen Marika, Elden Ring lore by Cosmos, who asked for some feedback on this video. I'm a little late at giving my feedback, but you know, better late than never. And then if we still have time, we will go into Dark Souls lore, Will, Duty, and Suffering by Wenders, who has been a longtime friend of the channel. I know he's been very interested in Bloodborne and Dark Souls lore. I don't know if he's actually played Elden Ring yet, because I haven't really seen him talk about it, but he has been kind of in the scene for a very long time, just in the lore discords and stuff like that. So, all right, we've definitely got a lot of good videos queued up for today. Hope you guys are strapped in and ready and can hear me. And let's go ahead and dive on into FromSoftware's Game Design Changed Everything by Nakey Jakey.
FromSoftware's game design has had a undeniable and profound effect on not only the
and let me know how the volume is, if his voice is okay compared to mine, and vice versa.
Industry. FromSoftware's game design has had a undeniable and profound effect on not only the gaming industry, but the industry of Jacobs, people named Jacobs, such as myself. With the massive success of Elden Ring, FromSoftware has further established that a merciless, uncompromising, gameplay-first design philosophy with little hand-holding or assistance can also still be a massive success that millions of people will connect with and absolutely adore. I am certain
this doesn't really like matter at all, but it just kind of cracks me up how much of us like FromSoft content creators are kind of compelled to use the Maiden in Black theme from Demon Souls. Just it's a very somber theme. So like the more I hear it, the more I notice. It's just like what's that called? Not the Mandela effect, but it's something different. But it's like whenever you like notice something, you just keep noticing it. It's just that kind of thing right there.
Certainly one of those millions. And while typically brilliant, I also believe that FromSoftware's games are unfortunately far from perfect, and Elden Ring is sadly no exception. And I want to talk about it.
Ooh, that's really nice to hear, just because I do think Elden Ring is unfairly pedestalized by a lot of the fan community at large. I still have yet to make my, full-on review of Elden Ring, so I was thinking maybe I'll do that once the DLC gets released, but my general tagline for my feelings on Elden Ring is one step back, two steps forward, if that makes any sense, because I feel like they didn't incorporate as much as they could have from the previous games, to set Elden Ring up for more success, and they still do have some archaic features of their predecessors that they could do away with that they just haven't gotten to yet. So it's kind of refreshing to hear somebody like, you know, come at it with a fairly level take so far. Not that I've obviously heard too much of what he's had to say yet. Pattern recognition. Yeah, I thought there was another term for it, but you're not wrong there.
But first, I must warn you that I will be spoiling the absolute Moonlight Greatsword out of all of these games, so if you haven't experienced them for yourself, particularly Elden Ring, I strongly suggest you hit pause on this video and go savor that experience first and come back in about 200 hours, because it is quite possibly the greatest experience I have had playing a video game in my 28 years of holding a Player 2 Mad Catz controller that isn't actually plugged in. Regardless, I believe it is no exaggeration to say that in the world of video games, FromSoftware has truly changed everything.
And that's a bit of a bold claim to me. Like, on one hand, I can see it, but I'm also just kind of like really resistant to that idea, probably because I'm an old boomer. And it's weird to me because like Dark Souls obviously represented a sea change in gaming, and Demon Souls did, you know, to much lesser extent. But they never really felt like super new, or that they actually like influenced games in such a way that they were, I don't want to say like genre defining, because they made their own genre, don't get me wrong there, but they didn't seem to have the same amount of impact to me personally than a game like Halo Combat Evolved, or even Call of Duty 4 to a lesser extent. That might not make like a ton of sense on its own, but just like, I think Halo walked, and Halo walking allowed Call of Duty to run, and then like Call of Duty more or less kind of like perfected the FPS genre formula, and pretty much all the other FPSs are derivative of either Halo or Call of Duty in some way or another, in my opinion. There might be like a bit more to it, I might not like have like the full picture there, but that's just kind of like the vibe check that I've got right there. So beyond that, we also have the like really quintessential forays into 3D gaming. So for me, that would be like Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, and Final Fantasy VII were the kind of like big ones for their respective genres in a way. And then before those, obviously, you just have like the Super Mario games and really changing everything. But yeah, so, well, I definitely can probably see where somebody's going to come from. Maybe this claim isn't meant to be, like, isn't like, maybe I'm making more out of the claim than it's meant to be, I guess I should say. Hey, Clown Scum, thanks for dropping into the stream. Nice to see you too.
Demon Souls was released in 2009 for the PlayStation 3 and was nothing like other big games coming out at the time, especially in 2009. In a year where games were becoming more and more cinematic and accessible and forgiving to a casual audience, Demon Souls crawled out of a wet crypt and said, "I will kill you." Demon Souls, like all the Souls games that came after it, is a very challenging and unforgiving video game, a difficulty that fans of the series often lovingly refer to as hard but fair. So let's maybe settle on hard but mostly fair. After joining FromSoft in 2004 and working as a coder on the Armored Core series, Hidetaka Miyazaki took over as director on a struggling high fantasy project that was running into some serious issues during development. Because the project was already seen as a failure inside the studio, Miyazaki was basically like, I'm gonna take this thing and I'm gonna take it out back to the garage. I'm gonna do some stuff to it. Inspired by FromSoft's own Kingsfield series, Miyazaki wanted to make a dark fantasy, gameplay-driven experience in collaboration with Sony Japan Studio. A challenging but rewarding experience that took gaming back to its basics, something he felt was dying out at the time. During development, Miyazaki actually tried to keep the harsh difficulty aspect on the low from publisher Sony, fearing that they might want to change it for being a bit too extreme, much like a BMX riding video game. game that sucked. Breaking down the basic gameplay of Demon's Souls will effectively break down the basic gameplay for all of the Souls games that followed, because the very core design pillars have gone largely unchanged. It starts with a character creator that, before you say anything, I know it gets better with time, that lets you pick a starting class, dictating your capabilities with different weapons or magic. A third-person lock-on camera system for combat that improves on the Z targeting system that Ocarina of Time introduced back in 00 that you can control the camera and attack people at the same time, which was kind of a breakthrough in and of itself. Animation-based combat that requires you to commit to each action and wait until the animation finishes before you can do something else, along with managing how that action affects your stamina bar, or in the case of casting spells, your magic bar. But I didn't raise you to cast no spells. This is a Claymore household just like my father and his father before him. A dodge roll that could...
So one thing that I've been like struggling with is, before Dark Souls, it feels like I've played games like Dark Souls, but I've been struggling to like really put my finger on what they were. And I guess oddly enough, it really is games. They are games like Super Mario 64 and even like Crash Bandicoot to an extent. Obviously, there is a large difference between like Crash and Dark Souls, but there is also a kind of really weird parallel through line. Well, I guess that's contradictory. There is like a really weird through line between them, because like with Crash, you have like a dedicated attack button, certain animations. You have to worry about enemy hitboxes, things of that nature as well. So he said some other stuff that I wanted to touch on, but I just kind of like lost my train of thought there. So, Jolteon Trader, welcome in. Chadwick Dillon, nice to see you again. V-Limit, nice to have you into the stream again. Monster Hunter not getting the credit for doing all that first. Yeah. Actually, I don't really know a lot about the timeline of Monster Hunter. You might really be onto something there. That should probably be something I look into. But, yeah. Dr. N, nice to have you again. Then DS3 happened and meaningful animation recovery ceased to exist. Bloodborne 2, kinda. A little bit, yeah. Without Horns, welcome back to the stream. And then Bacchus said earlier, FromSoft games aren't perfect. For example, Dark Souls declines in quality mid-game, and a lot after Morgot and Elden Ring suffers in quality as well. Yeah, it wouldn't be a real FromSoft game if it was a fully finished product. Now would it be?
Contains invincibility frames, or iframes, meaning that if you time your dodge right, nothing can possibly hurt you, similar to action games like Devil May Cry. Corpse running, where if you die, you drop all the...
That's another really big one. Devil May Cry. Yeah, those kind of games were also, different, but similar in, like, the third-person, backed-up camera, action-style games, arcade games.
The current...
Oh, Dynasty Warriors. Duh, that's like a really big one. That's like should have been a no-brainer to me. Like, Dynasty Warriors in many ways has very similar combat principles. I don't want to say mechanics, because, one's like a beat 'em up. How can you even it's a Musou game. So they have like weapon ranges. Enemies have weapon ranges. If you have ever done like PvP in Dynasty Warriors, it's kind of a similar experience to Dark Souls. You had a guard, a block button. I don't think you really had like a dodge button though. It's been a really long time. No, I don't think so. But yeah, anyway. So there were definitely other games that had pretty significant similarities to Dark Souls. But I do agree with like Nakey Jakey here that, even though he hasn't said this quite directly, that the real difference between like Dark Souls was that it was kind of a return to the roots of gaming. So like for us boomers here, we grew up on games like Ghosts and Goblins, or arcade games, God forbid the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, regular Nintendo game trying to go through the dam level, like literally DAM dam. The Simpsons arcade game. So like difficulty in games way back then was just scaled up because devs wanted people's quarters, which, I mean, I don't blame them. So yeah, games are just a hell of a lot more difficult back then. And then in the early thousands, in the PS2 era, they became a lot more forgiving because devs realized they already got your money. They don't need to make the games ridiculously difficult. And then came the whole I almost want to say like Ubisoftification of the games, where they just became like more HUD heavy and like bloated and held the player's hands so much, where like you never really felt that kind of tension that you would get from the earlier titles. So the comparison between like Dark Souls that I've always made is that it's been a kind of like remodernization on the take of classic games such as Mega Man, where it takes a bit of memorization and pattern recognition to go through each level and like defeat the boss, which is something I really enjoyed because I grew up on like the Mega Man games and all that. Uh, Caver Sen. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Cat, I'll call you. Been enjoying the vids, but never made a stream. Wondering if I've seen the snake iceberg thing Hawkshaw did. The snake iceberg? No. You thought it was a little silly, and I tend to offer great critique. Yeah, if you make a comment on like the actual video here, if you want me to react to that, I will most likely do it at some point. So if you just tell me in chat, I'm very likely to forget. So if you do it like on the comments, I'll get the notification whenever, and then that'll remind me to like go back and add it to the list. But yeah, thanks, and welcome into the stream. Havel the Bonk, welcome in. Very familiar name, but maybe not a familiar person. Bloodborne is probably never going to be beat. It feels like the most well-paced and as close to perfect as it can be. I have mixed feelings about that because I really enjoy a lot of Bloodborne as well, but I do think it can be beat. Like, if Bloodborne had a much better item economy, oh man, it could have been such a better game. I feel like if FromSoft ever took the bold step to get away from like a lot more of its RPG elements, they could probably make more compelling games. So I think in some ways Sekiro came the closest to that idea, but I also think Sekiro was held back by a shit item economy and having like so many skills get like, arbitrarily gated by like experience and stuff like that. So if they ever manage to figure that kind of thing out, or some other dev does, I could see games being better. But yeah, I would agree that like Bloodborne is definitely a high bar in gaming, at least for me. It's all good, clown scum. All right, let's go back to the video.
Currency you've racked up from killing enemies, and you got to make it back to that spot without dying, otherwise you lose it forever. Passive and non-passive online interaction where other players can leave helpful tips or whatever the opposite of a helpful tip is, along with some...
I think that may have been like the most innovative part of Dark Souls, now that I think about it. And I'll keep pausing. I'll quit pausing the video so much for a little bit here.
Summoning or being summoned as a random cooperator to help, or invasions to either kill or be killed. And the gameplay of each individual Souls game obviously goes a lot deeper than that, with different complex systems and healing items and stupid convoluted bullshit like world tendency that you need a fucking master's degree to understand. But the challenging and
Alright, real talk, I kind of hate Naked Jakey for all his editing, because it's so freaking good. It just puts me to shame. He just has really good like comedic timing and an ability to keep the videos extremely engaging that I'm just like mad jealous of and everything. So I digress. Even though I just said, hey guys, I'll stop pausing the video so much. Nope, I lied.
Methodical combat system. That has always been the beating heart of all of these games. A heart that's married to another heart. Exploration. You know how in my Rockstar's game design video, I really harp on how those games constantly berate you with hyper-specific instructions and yellow map markers and assume you have the IQ of a tiny baby rat?
Hey, that's what I was talking about, yeah.
Like the exact polar opposite. The tiny baby rat is now actually a boss, and you have no idea what the fuck is going on. And what makes exploration so compelling in Demon Souls, and really all Souls games, is that it is true exploration that really makes you feel like Batman. No, it really makes you feel like an explorer. There is no detailed map that you can rely on and consult, only your own sense of direction and understanding of a space. This, along with a strong challenge and an actual fear of having something to lose with the corpse running system, makes discoveries and victories feel that much more meaningful and rewarding. Because you really feel like you, the player, actually charted and conquered a space and overcame a significant challenge instead of just watching fucking Wally do it in a cutscene. The Souls games have very few cutscenes or long, unskippable passages of dialogue by NPCs or RPG conversation trees where your choice actually doesn't really matter. Instead, the story is discovered and slowly unraveled by the player through observing their environment and reading item descriptions and inevitably watching Vati Vidya videos because I don't understand any of this. So you're saying the rat was like a...
All right, Havel the Bonk says, world tendency. Weirdly, you thought it was a great idea. Could it be explained? Sure, but they should have ditched it? No. And that's something I agree about to an extent. Sorry, I thought I heard like Santa sleigh bells or something. Anyway, what was I saying? The world tendency stuff. So yeah, my biggest wish for Elden Ring, or pretty much any game in the future that's going to be like open world or something similar, would be to have a world that kind of evolves with the actions of the player. And of course, that's a hell of a lot easier said than done. But I'll just keep standing on my soapbox saying how much cooler Elden Ring could have been if, like, instead of defeating Godric, you did something different and went to Radahn first. And after you like fought Radahn, Godric could have invaded like Renala's territory, like beaten her, gotten more power ups. And so, if depending on like the order of the demigods that you fought, there were like extraneous wars going on beyond that that could have like changed the enemy placements in different parts of the world, that would be like my top tier 9, 10 out of 10 like kind of game, depending on like how well it's executed, obviously. But it is a bit disappointing to me how good Elden Ring's world is and how static it is. So this doesn't really matter too much, but I was kind of a little bit disappointed that whenever I went to a site of grace and went back to like a ruin that was on the ground, it had like the exact same ruin fragment drops in the exact same spots. So the world just felt very static rather than more dynamic. Like picking up herbs didn't really matter because they would just kind of like respawn there and everything. And then somebody else said something. Oh yeah, Conscom was talking about Elder Scrolls after Dark Souls. So yeah, going back to like what Nakey Jakey was talking about here with the hand holding in video games, I think like the difference between Morrowind and Oblivion and Skyrim is a very good picture of the general route that gaming was taking, and Dark Souls bucked the hell out of that trend and kind of forced developers to really consider like a factory reset. Obviously not all of them, because we still have like the whole Ubisoft style design going strong. But yeah, with Elden Ring winning Game of the Year, that really pressed a lot of devs' buttons in all the right ways to get them pretty peeved at how obscure and frustrating the game can be. So there is a little bit of merit in their complaints. I do think that the games are a little bit overly cryptic, but just in general, like obviously our audience here is a much bigger fan of this style of game than the kind of a hand-holding design found in games like Skyrim and maybe Starfield. I haven't played Starfield, but hey, a bit of gaming news for anybody who hasn't heard yet. Starfield has recently achieved mostly negative reviews in Steam, so feels bad, man. Don't want people to release bad games, so it's a bit of a bummer. Hopefully they get it right next time. What else can you say? Santa deniers will say it's fake. Yeah, the Lands Between seems to be in an unending stalemate. And it would be like one thing if you saw a lot of the factions like warring a bit more, but they've kind of all lost too much of their minds to do anything, which might be diegetic and like part of the story, I guess, but it is just a little bit disappointing to me. Oh yeah, Fable 3 compared to Fable 2 and Fable 1. Oof. Nectarine, welcome back to the stream. Starfield shows that you cannot, in fact, sell a game from 2016 in the modern day. You can, but I mean, don't market it like it's $100 million game, you know? There's plenty of games from 2016 that still hold up, and the indie market is still going strong. Like, I have a couple games on my Steam wish list that look like they could have come out in like 2007, you know? So, nonetheless, you do have a point there. All right. Hey, Bella.
At some point, or I appreciate Miyazaki's approach to storytelling though, because it's very unique to the medium of video games, and was actually inspired by his real-life experience of reading English language sci-fi and fantasy books as a kid that he couldn't fully understand but would fill in the gaps using his imagination. The story is so much more about the general mood and atmosphere and feeling of exploring a place rather than scripted plot points or set pieces. The innovative online elements of summoning random strangers to help you out was actually inspired by Miyazaki's real life as well, where after his car was trapped in snow on a hill, a random group of strangers showed up and helped push the car out of the snow and then mysteriously drifted off into the night like ghosts, drifting in and out of his world at a poorly framed pace, 30 frames per second. These games also have some technical issues. Demon's Souls was not an immediate success. Sony decided to not publish it in North America after feeling pretty negatively about it before its release. During the Tokyo Game Show in 2008, Sony president Shuei Yoshida played it for 2 hours, couldn't get past the starting area, and then stopped playing and said, "This is an unbelievably bad video game." This is the same guy.
And it's so funny. Okay, I guess he's going to bring it up.
That years later would platinum Bloodborne, and that game is like way harder. So spoiler alert, FromSoftware changed everything. The titular line. It wasn't until later in 2009 when Atlas would publish the game in North America that sales would slowly start to pick up, and critics...
You know, Atlas has always been one of those companies that's been on my radar that make really niche games, but they are just... If you enjoy those style of games, they are just so good. Like, the Persona games originally, like, were published by Atlas in the West and stuff like that. So that's like one of the companies that still has like a lot of decent street cred, at least for me. But to be fair, like I don't follow like a lot of the details of what all else they release. But anyway, they just haven't tarnished their reputation, pun intended, I suppose. All right, so Jay Moore, welcome back to the stream. Mortis, nice to have you guys again. You can't look at any picture of Miyazaki without laughing now. Thank you, Cab. I appreciate that. You did not have a good experience with Lords of the Fallen. I'm sad to hear that. I think, Mortis, you're probably just trying too hard. My recommendation would be just relax. It took me a little bit of time to get used to the controls, and there is a learning curve, but if you're not enjoying it, don't force yourself, because that doesn't necessarily lead to a better time. I think you're just, like, putting too much pressure on yourself, but yeah. Like the beginning is a lot slower, but as you like go a bit more, you'll get the better hang of like Umbral and stuff, and I think you would enjoy that aspect of the game. Nothingness agrees about the world being static. You felt like the Black Flame incantations not changing after fighting Malekith and freeing the Rune of Death should have changed. Yeah, I mean there might be a reason for that, but yeah, there could have been room for improvements. But I mean, to be fair, I mean, this isn't really fair. Just to put things in perspective, like, I don't think the game really fully released in a complete state when you look at how many quest lines were literally unfinished, with Patches, Kennethite, Nefeli, and Gustok being, you know, kind of one big quest. Tanith, sort of. Well, yeah, well, you know what? That's kind of weird. I guess Tanith might still be unfinished? Question mark? Maybe there's more in the DLC, guys, right? Anyway. Do you think Bluepoint will ever be handed Bloodborne to remake? I have no idea. I tend to try to not speculate because, I don't know. Especially like having like a public platform like this, some people could just kind of like misconstrue things, and I don't like to overhype the hype train without like actual substance to like go along with it. And I tend to be extremely skeptical about announcements of things like that. And even Yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of all I have to say about that. So as for Blue Point, maybe I just kind of doubt it. I don't necessarily think it needs a remaster. It's still a really good looking game. It should just be like updated to at least 60 FPS, and yeah, I think it'd be pretty decent still. And of course, like maybe like scaling the resolution a bit if you can. But yeah, it's whatever. Oh yeah, Unicorn Overlord. I remember the title of that game and being really intrigued by it. You thought they thought it was fake initially? Yeah. I need to remember to like be on the lookout for that game. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about Lords of the Fallen, Doctor N. Yeah, the cutscenes are a bit rough, Mortis. That's why I was kind of saying it might be better to just like wait a couple months till they fix it all. Global sequence, welcome in. Oh yeah, you said something earlier. What was it? I just kind of missed it. I apologize. I wanted to comment on what you said. Okay. Chimera, interesting name. I like that. Many artists say that their work is never finished, only abandoned. You're not wrong there. You fell through the map? Okay. Oh, that's rough. That never happened to me. You said you got it on console too, right? Yeah, that might be part of it. So, yeah, I know console has had a rougher time with the game. Okay, okay. Going back to the video.
Would start to take notice. Western audiences generally loved it because apparently we're all sick, masochistic bastards, and GameSpot even gave it their Game of the Year, the same year that Uncharted 2 and Modern Warfare 2 came out. But along with establishing the core pillars of what a Souls game would be, it's important to talk about just how brave Miyazaki, FromSoftware, and Sony Japan Studio were for making such a different kind of game. Demon Souls was a huge risk, an imperfect, weird, brutal passion project that was expected by everyone to flop, but refused to compromise on its design goals and eventually found an audience that really connected with it. And 2 console generations later, an extremely faithful remake was published by Sony as a launch title for the PlayStation 5. And there you have it. That's it. That's the end. It's the only game they ever made.
Oh wow, he does actually apparently edit the videos himself. I was wondering if he had like someone help him. You know, just doing this much editing takes so much time. So the other thing that's like kind of like showing how the sausage is made, it's just like how many takes it takes to just speak so seemingly casually yet articulately enough for people to understand you. It's quite a lot more difficult than one might initially expect. Like right there, instead of saying initially, I said initially. So if I was like recording, I would have like stopped and gone back and done another take. So anyway.
It's the only game they ever made. I love Dark Souls, but I also hated Dark Souls. My brother Isaac had played Dark Souls sometime after its release in 2011 and had repeatedly told me to play it. I eventually finally tried it, got past the tutorial section after a lot of struggling, made it to Firelink Shrine, wandered the wrong way into a graveyard full of skeletons, as I know a lot of people did. That graveyard eventually became a dark tunnel of skeletons that killed me a bunch of times, and then I promptly said F this game and stopped playing. I can't remember.
Yeah, as soon as I saw the exploding skulls, I was like, nope, I'm not going this way. Can't do it. And so I didn't quit then. How far did I get the first time I stopped? I think I got to Anne Orlando. I would need to like look back at my old like Steam achievements for Prepare to Die edition. But that like a lot of my achievements got really messed up because when I did play through the game mostly after that, I was like in a place where I didn't have internet, so I just got like a bunch on the same day, so I don't really know how long it took me to do certain things. You have a theory that every FromSoft game would be 10 times better if we gave those guys like 2 more years between titles? Oh yeah, absolutely. Which is why I don't really sweat how long it took for them to like release Elden Ring and or its DLC.
Remember for what exact reason, but a year or two later, I tried the game again, probably because of my brother's insistence, once again, the bastard he is, and it was different. This time it stuck. Not only did it stick, but it seriously changed my life. I know that sounds super dramatic, but like it completely changed the way I look at video games and why I like to play them, and made me want to talk about them more and examine them. And it absolutely ruined most other video games for me, because once I finished it, nothing could fill the giant rat boss size in my heart. Now, if I were to go into
Yeah, and that is kind of interesting because Dark Souls and the Soulsborne titles do seem to have a much larger effect on its audience than like a bunch of other games. There's something very visceral, pun intended, about like finally defeating a boss and like getting that rush of like, yes, victory after all this time, I did it. And then you're like, oh, oh, oh. All right, now what? And then you don't even know what's coming around the next corner. It can be pretty magical the first time you finally get a game that's rewarding just through its basic gameplay loops. No wallet or microtransactions required, you know?
all of the reasons why Dark Souls is so significant in gaming history, we would be here all day and my editor would absolutely hate that.
I am going to kill you.
But on my road to eventually talking about Elden Ring, I do need to touch on three crucial aspects that vastly improved on Demon Souls game design. Super Exploration DX Turbo Edition with f***les. Estus Flask, I hardly know her, as best as I can. And Atmosphere, you've been seen. I feel you inside my screen. I also didn't like that. What I mean by Super Exploration DX Turbo Edition with f***les is that Dark Souls
I have no idea where he's going with this, so please explain.
fundamentally changed how level design and world design worked within this gameplay formula that Demon Souls established. While Demon Holes over here had a hub world that let you freely fast travel to different zones of varying locales and difficulty levels, Dark Souls over here took a lot of its zones and stacked them on top of each other like a stack of pancakes, and made sure that even if some pancakes have chocolate chips or some pancakes have bananas, that they all seamlessly flow into each other and make sense as one cohesive world in this beautiful interconnected short stack of pancakes. Blight Town is like a pancake made out of pigeons. During the first half of the game, you have no fast travel, and all of the areas are connected in multiple complex ways like a maze.
So part of me, like, I understand where he's coming from, and I do think Dark Souls especially does this extremely well, especially compared to like when it came out. But I don't necessarily think it was entirely unique, because one game that stands out to me for having a somewhat interconnected world, but I think is kind of mostly limited by the technology of its time, would be the Jak and Daxter franchise, which they were really good games, but I guess they weren't as popular as I thought they were, or they just like kind of fell off in between the cracks as time has gone by, or like they aren't as looked fondly upon as like Mario. Well, Mario is not a fair comparison. As something like Crash, I guess. So, or Spyro. So yeah, I don't know. That's weird. Have to think about that a bit more. Speaking of bosses, why is Malekith such bullcrap? It's a good question. Mostly because I actually didn't really have too many issues with the Malekith part of the fight. It's just because like your rank is too fast, and if you're playing a melee character, he closes the gap extremely quickly and then disengages extremely quickly. So it's a literal game of cat and mouse, except you're the mouse. So he's a real pain in the ass. And then the other part is, if you're trying to fish for parries with the Blasphemous Claw, it's kind of a bit of a noob trap, because it's not very obvious that the timing window for executing those kinds of parries is contingent upon his blade glowing a golden color. But that's a good question. Sarcastic, nice to see you again. Thank you. Welcome back in. Maury Willow, welcome in. Now you want pancakes, don't we all? You always call a door locked from one side a Dark Souls shortcut. Learning positioning with Malekith was very fun. Oh yeah, and of course, like the Zelda games were also extremely interconnected. Maybe not some of the later ones. I mean, obviously not to the same degree, but in some ways, like the 2D versions of the Zeldas were kind of like the prototypical versions of like Dark Souls, or even a game like Alundra, which I kind of want to play on stream in the near future. Had this like idea in like its roots, but Dark Souls probably came out at the right time where the technology was able to allow the developers to kind of craft these kind of worlds. Because I don't, even though I was like talking about Jack and Daxter earlier, I'm just gonna assume like nobody ever watched like this like very short documentary about like the making of like Jack and Daxter 2 or something like that. The devs wanted to make a sprawling city, but the PS2 hardware's architecture couldn't really allow for that to happen. So a lot of their game design decisions were based on their hardware limitations, which is, you know, kind of inherent of every game. Even now, that's still a thing, but it's just kind of interesting because like the Jack and Daxter games were PS2, and they were kind of like they had their own like kind of interconnected worlds, not to the same degree as like Dark Souls. But then on the PS3 and, you know, the Xbox 360, you get the whole Dark Souls changing everything. And Matt Spoon, I don't remember if I welcomed you in, but welcome on in. All right, going back to the video, and Phaelad, welcome in. Majora's Mask, yeah. Okay.
So there's this palpable sense of danger and tension that slowly rises as you venture deeper and deeper into this beautiful, mysterious world that is very clearly inspired by Berserk, which is amazing. That tension is brilliantly paired with the new addition of bonfires, resting points that let you catch your breath for a second and spend your hard-earned currency from fighting enemies and bosses on leveling up your
and of
stat
course, like
points
the
and
Metroid
refilling
games.
your much-needed Estus flask.
Castlevania.
I have a pretty firm opinion that the healing mechanics found in Demon Souls and Bloodborne and kind of Dark Souls 2 are vastly inferior to the standard Estus flask system found in the other Souls games. The Estus has a specific amount of healing charges that you can increase throughout the course of the game, and the only way to refill your charges is by resting at a bonfire, which also respawns all enemies in the area. Not only does this provide an extra incentive to seek out and discover bonfires and push on while exploring, but it solves the dumbass problem those other games have where your healing items are a finite currency that you can run out of. Meaning that if you're struggling with the game and you keep dying, and you will likely have to halt progression just to go grind mobs of weaker enemies for healing items or currency that you can then spend on healing items and not leveling up, which feels so unnecessarily punishing in a game where enemies do this to you. With the Estus,
that executioner that's not a real executioner is yeah. Anyway, so I agree a lot with what he says there, and I'll also refine the point a little bit further in that I do think there are some inherent advantages to the Estus system because it is a constant reminder of your current resources on hand, because you don't necessarily just pick up Estus flasks off the ground and are able to like press on further. You know you can't rely on ambient world healing so you can press on. So it adds a lot of extra mental weight and tension to the player than a game like Bloodborne where you can get blood vials off of almost any enemy. But yeah, I do think the economization of both Demon Souls and Bloodborne especially are terrible. And then Dark Souls 2 is kind of like it's its own thing. It's kind of like the cross between the normal Dark Souls experience and Demon Souls, except like the animations are so slow for healing. It's just awful. Dark Souls 2 is just not my cup of tea. Acer's getting big upset right now. Okay. Havel says Jack and Daxter was there. Mario, a new one came out each chapter of your life. It felt targeted at you specifically. That's awesome. Acer's still a diehard Grass fan. It can be good, but like Nikki Jakey's saying, it's really bad for players who are actively being punished. It's kind of like a lose more condition in the game. So if they combined it, like, so Dark Souls 2 could be good, except it's not. How else do you really say that? It's just like Dark Souls 2 has kind of like the grass system as well as the Estus Flask, but just healing in general is just not that. I don't want to say like rewarding, enjoyable, I guess, in that game. Clown is DS2's biggest defender. Alright, going back to the vid.
You at least know that for the next bit you have a guaranteed specific amount of heals, and much like a survival horror game, the goal is to get to the next area using as little Estus as best as you can. I think one of the greatest single improvements over Demon Holes over here is the atmosphere. I will never forget how it felt to get lost in this world. Struggling my ass off through Undead Burg and Undead Parish, and finally being rewarded by finding that shortcut back to Firelink Shrine and hearing that comforting music creep in. That seriously changed the trajectory of my firstborn son's life. He's getting into brown now. Journeying all the way down to first the depths, and then Blight Town, and then finding the entrance that's a secret to the Great Hollow, and making my way down that, and finally ending up at Ash Lake gave me a feeling that I will forever cherish. The inability to easily fast travel back up to Firelink Shrine after I journeyed all the way down there simultaneously had me terrified and also in complete awe of the vertical scope of this world. And there's so much of this game that you can just completely miss.
Absolutely, and I had a similar experience when I discovered Ash Lake. It's just kind of hard to really put into words there, so he did a really respectable job there.
Software doesn't care if every player sees all of the content that they made for this game, and that makes finding the stuff that you do find feel that much more special and memorable. I know it's just all smoke and mirrors and code and textures, but the illusion that FromSoftware sells here is a powerful one. Except for some clearly
I definitely appreciate that little double entendre that he was doing right there. And like I've said about these games for a very long time, it always feels like you get out of them what you put into them. And so they're very rewarding, like the more you dive into them. And then they're no longer rewarding and you've already gone too deep into the rabbit hole and there's no coming back.
But the illusion that FromSoftware sells here is a powerful one. Except for some clearly unfinished areas towards the end of the game, but those don't exist. You made Lost Izalith up. Gaslight, gaslight, gaslight. Unlike Demon Souls, Dark Souls was a pretty instant success. Critics loved it, and the game reached a much larger audience right off the bat, thanks to Bandai Namco publishing it all over the world on PS3 and Xbox 360 and PC, with one of the most janky PC ports to ever exist. Shout out Games for Windows Live, RIP. This also annoyingly led to so many industry heads resorting to the phrases, "It's like Dark Souls," or "This is the Dark Souls of blank," when in reality, all they're trying to say is that it's hard. Going to Arby's is like the Dark Souls of going to Carl's Jr. Hollow Knight is very clearly inspired by FromSoftware's approach, and that game is undoubtedly the greatest Metroidvania ever made. I fucking love Hollow Knight, primarily because it perfected a design aspect from Dark Souls 1 that FromSoftware themselves kind of started to abandon with subsequent Souls games. Non-linear exploration. Shut up already! Jesus, that guy loves to talk. Hi, I'm Jakey, and Jakey, attorneys at law. Here at Jakey, and Jakey, we have a lot of expenses. And a lot of those expenses are monthly subscriptions that we totally forget we're even paying for. Well, today's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to help. Rocket Money is an all-in-one finance platform that helps you save more and spend less. This personal finance app allows you to manage subscriptions, lower bills, build a custom budget, and grow your savings all in one place. We personally use it to identify and securely cancel recurring charges or unwanted subscriptions, all with the simple tap of a finger, which is a godsend for the social anxiety of having to actually call people on the phone to cancel stuff. What is this, fucking 1882?
Which reminds me, when I stop streaming, guys, let me know to cancel my YouTube Premium.
Columbus sailed the oceans 11. We also use it to track our monthly spending and set budgets. Rocket Money notifies us if we exceed that budget, along with showing our spend to earn ratio every month, quarter, or year. Also, if you're like us and gonna turn 29 this year, maybe you're starting to pay a little bit more attention to your credit score. Well, Rocket Money alerts you of important changes to your score and also offers you insights on ways you could improve your score as well. To save more and spend less, join the 3.4 million members using Rocket Money. We've got the hookup. Go to rocketmoney.com/nakeyjakey or click the link in the description to get started for free or unlock even more features with premium. That's rocketmoney.com/nakeyjakey to get started for free. Get your money right! Alright, now let's get on back to Naked Jake and the curious case of the floating rake. This guy never even beat Digimon World 2. That's a real Souls game. I'm out of here. Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, and Dark Souls 3 all have much more straightforward progression paths than the first half of Dark Souls 1. And while a lot of areas in these games are technically connected and sometimes offer alternate paths, the general world design is far less interesting from an exploration point of view. And it doesn't mean that these games are bad. All of these games probably each deserve their own 40-minute feature presentation breaking them down, but for the sake
I don't know. I feel like even Dark Souls 1, while it's super praised, I feel like even its quote-unquote non-linearity is pretty shallow. In some ways, Dark Souls 2 is a bit better about it, but... Well, it's actually kind of like a lot better about it, but they just kind of all get, what's the word? Not like pigeonholed, but something similar to it. Let's just say like pigeonholed through a choke... Like, they have like certain choke points where you need to go to like get through to the end game, so they're not entirely non-linear, which isn't it's not an inherently terrible thing, but it's not like the bastion of non-linearity that you'd get in like a Bethesda, Skyrim, Fallout style game. You have to pay premium tomorrow. You'd rather pay advertisers to not advertise to you? That sucks. You wish you could pay companies to leave me alone? Here, I'll pay $50 for a lifetime ad exclusion. Never solicit me again. Man, I wonder how many companies would sincerely consider that. I get so many ads of like stuff that is completely non-relevant to me. I got a Meta/Facebook ad on YouTube a couple weeks ago, and I was like, why am I seeing this ad? So I clicked it, and then in like the little YouTube ad settings, it said that I had already like turned it down to the lowest setting that I possibly could. I was like, why YouTube? Why to Google? You've got my data and you're still misusing it. Your dad included you into his YouTube Premium family plan. You wouldn't use it otherwise. That feels so weird to say. YouTube Premium family plan. I know I saw it when I like signed up for this the other day, but it's just a really weird sentence to say.
Sake of what I want to get into today, I'm just going to give you the Spark Notes version. Dark Souls 2 dropped in 2014 and was received well and sold well. It further grew the Souls game community and deepened combat systems while adding stuff like power stancing. Miyazaki didn't direct this one, and it does show. The atmosphere of each zone feels a bit random and unconnected from the overall world, but the boss fights and DLCs are great, and the game enjoyed a large online community for shit like PvP. Bloodborne was developed alongside Dark Souls 2 and was released exclusively for the PS4 in 2015, and I used money from a car accident to buy a PS4 and Bloodborne instead of paying my rent. And contrary to what my financial advisors might be saying, and Logan Roy looking ass, I'd say it was a wise investment. Directed by Miyazaki, Bloodborne felt like the true follow-up to Dark Souls 1. At least for people like me that just want to swing a big sword and fucking parry everything. Bye-bye.
The funny thing is, and I was just thinking about this the other day, even though I like played Dark Souls 1, it didn't really like sink into my head like, oh, this is made by a specific company. Like I just played it. At the time I'd like gone to buy Bloodborne, I don't think I'd actually finished Dark Souls 1. It was just on my like list of games to go back and beat because I got like frustrated and whatnot. And I saw the commercial for Bloodborne and I was like, yes, this is right up my alley. It's everything I want. The Order 1886 or something like that looked kind of interesting, but I was kind of on the fence on it. But Bloodborne had like ticked all the right boxes for me, and so I was definitely on board from the very beginning there. So anyway.
Hi, Magic. Go back to fucking Waverly Place. Faster combat that rewards aggressive play. Intricate and varied weapon movesets. An atmosphere that just drips out of your TV with such dedicated attention to detail and talent in the art design department and rats. Dark Souls 3 dropped in 2016, and by this point, the Souls series was poppin' and beloved by many people. Directed once again by Miyazaki, DS3 did everything right on paper. It kept some of the faster-paced combat and up enemy designs and boss transformations from Bloodborne, while also returning an expansive armory of weapons and magic, lending to a buttload of different kinds of builds. It has
And a lot of people also resented the increased speed in which Dark Souls 3 played, which I can definitely understand where they're coming from. And I know a lot of people also disliked some of like the more transforming style enemies that you would get in Bloodborne in Dark Souls 3. So the crucifixion wood werewolf type guys I know were kind of annoying. Or like the pus of men annoyed some people that weren't on board with that for like Dark Souls 1 and 2, I guess. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not one of those type of people, but it's just what I've heard on the grapevine throughout the years.
a large amount of fan service and callbacks to Dark Souls 1 and some of the hardest bosses seen in a Souls game yet. It also just feels really, really good to play and looks beautiful, but also something about this formula was starting to feel just a little bit stale. Don't get me wrong,
I agree.
Dark Souls 3, especially doing co-op boss fights with my brother, was some of the most fun I've had in any of these games. But that strong sense of exploration felt in Dark Souls 1, that feeling of charting your way through a mysterious and dangerous world, I longed for that. The Dark Souls series had completely shaken the game industry and clearly inspired other developers to change how their games were designed and played. But playing Dark Souls 3 felt a bit like listening to FromSoftware's greatest hits versus hearing the band's new album that would maybe take them someplace new. Little did I know, FromSoftware was in the studio working on their In Rainbows, as in the album In Rainbows.
That's a weird comparison to make.
Radiohead's best album, as in Elden Ring.
I'm so tempted to just like look at the comments to see if other Radiohead nerds are like foaming at the mouth, but I figure they'd probably be like so far down the list. It's kind of an insightful statement for anybody who's like a super big Radiohead fan, because their style has been all over the place. But anyway, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. You're watching this 22 minutes in the past, an extremely faithful remake is a funny joke. Hey, more lore, welcome back into the stream 22 minutes ago. Kid A, yeah, exactly. Now we're gonna have people like fight about Kid A, In Rainbows. I actually really liked God, I'm so bad at names. Why can't I think of any of them? Okay Computer. That wasn't what I was gonna say though. The one that has like Burn the Witch is one of the very newer ones. Knives Out was interesting, but it wasn't like nearly my favorite. It was kind of like hit or miss. But anyway, Radiohead is very interesting and a very diverse band.
Some of you might be wondering, Jacob Matthew, why did it take you so long to make a video on Elden Ring? And I have two answers for you. A, last year I was very busy working on an album called Romcom, shout out jakeymerch.com. And B, this game is just too damn big and felt too daunting to dissect and talk about, and I also just wanted to keep playing it, but I feel like I'm finally ready to get into it with my support group. That's you. This is all of you. Where do I even begin though? Elden Ring isn't perfect, but that's also what makes it so compelling. It's not properly balanced. I mean, none of these games are. They never have been. FromSoft has pretty clear favorites when it comes to certain weapons and buffs and spells. You can absolutely break these games in half if you really want to. But the sheer depth of content that Elden Ring slowly unveils to you during your 200 or so hours of playing it, the childhood fantasy of exploring a fantastical, magical world filled with swords and beasts and, you guessed it, rats, is fully manifested in a way that knows no contemporary. There is no other Elden Ring than Elden Ring. This isn't just the Dark Souls of Dark Souls. This is the Dark Souls of Breath of the Wild. This is the Dark Souls of Red Dead Redemption 2. If you took a
That's very interesting that he said it's the Dark Souls of Breath of the Wild, because after this video, we're going to check out Moxie Watt's video about Zelden Ring. So I'm very curious to see the similarities or differences of opinion that the two will have here.
time machine back to 2003 and showed my wooden sword in the backyard swinging ass that this is what was coming in the future, I would have shot you in the head and called the cops. Elden Ring is truly the adventure of a lifetime. But because I've already spent so much time talking about the core design pillars that all of these games share, I want to instead focus on certain pillars that Elden Ring innovates on or potentially fails to innovate on. Exploration and scale.
Ooh boy, I'm here for it.
Dragons, starring Chris Pine, and difficulty and accessibility. Where Dark Souls 1's world is like a short stack of pancakes, all connected, Elden Ring's world is like a giant stack of pancakes, and you took all those pancakes and you spread them out across a giant table. And most of the pancakes are touching each other, and some of the pancakes have other pancakes hiding underneath them, and other pancakes might transport you to far pancakes in f***ed up ways, and some of the pancakes are on fire and make you feel fear. I don't want to be in this Denny's anymore. Let me out! Miyazaki has stated that Elden Ring is the closest thing to his ideal game that he would personally like to play, and that going open world enriches this ideal experience that he's trying to achieve. A game where if you saw something over there, you could actually go over there. A game that isn't open world just to be in the same category as some bloated Ubisoft bullshit, but a game that's open world because it needs to be. In order to fully capture the fantasy.
Why do we always crap on Ubisoft? Like, that's the one that always comes to mind. The funny thing is, and you know, maybe this is exactly why, the funny thing is I can't even really name any Ubisoft titles off the top of my head. They just have such a bad rep within the gaming community that they're the whipping stock of the fandom, I guess. Whipping boys, I don't know. All right, so Matt Spoon, welcome in. You said you wish your guy could just move faster. Some of the enemies feel like they can run circles around the player. Beastmen, rotbug guys, banished knights, everything is faster than the player. Yeah, I didn't really feel that for a very long time. And then, honestly, after playing Lords of the Fallen and then going back to, look at some things in Elden Ring to, get footage or, screenshots of, I felt so much slower than I ever, really realized. And I think some of that is mitigated by torrent. So, yeah, I do know where you're coming from, especially after having, played the two games, back to back. And the other thing that I did really like about Lord of the Fallen's control is that sprint was bound to, the L3 input. So that way you could, just sprint without moving your other thumb away from the thumbstick or whatever the hell else it was doing. I don't know. It was kind of nice from the camera. So, yeah. And that might have also contributed to some of Mortis's pain earlier, because he said he didn't have a controller. So I should remember to talk to him about that if he's AFK now. Far Cry and Assassin's Creed. Okay. Yeah, I never really played those games. The first Assassin's Creed looked really cool and interesting, and then they came out with a second one, and a third one, and a fourth one, and, it just, really lost all kind of intrigue to me when Assassin's Creed was, all parody and stuff. It just, man, I didn't mean to make this a pun, so no pun intended. It really jumped the shark when, it went that route, for me at least.
of being an adventurer in a giant world, riding across a vast landscape on your trusty steed. You first need to have that vast landscape to really nail that feeling. Elden Ring was inspired by Breath of the Wild, and it very clearly shows, because like Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring...
I'm really curious about that, because I imagine they would have had like simultaneous development, but I don't remember the timeline, so he might be right here. Anyway.
knows and expects that your curiosity will naturally lead you to finding interesting things. There doesn't need to be an overwhelming list of things to check off or obvious map markers going, over here, it's fucking over here. Because that would totally rob the player of a true sense of mystery and discovery when exploring this massive world. Elden Ring is very okay with hiding its hand. This is what the map looks like when you start the game, and this is what it looks like when you finish the game. And these are the pancakes that are cooking underneath you the entire time. Having a chest throw a smoke grenade at you in the starting area and being transported and waking up in one of the most giant late game areas and checking the map and seeing it zoom out like that was an experience I will never forget. And
yeah, I freaked out a bit. I was like, no, I don't want to get to the end area. There's so much I haven't seen yet. So I just like got to the grace there and just like noped on out as soon as I landed.
The lore behind the lands between is so rich in detail and intrigue. Miyazaki's style of storytelling through gameplay, combined with the Bible of world history that George R.R. Martin developed for this game, will leave an MF feeling like goddamn Amy Adams, as in downright enchanted. I know I haven't mentioned Sekiro once in this video because it's technically not a Souls game, but it was a crucial stepping stone towards Elden Ring's development. The addition of a dedicated jump button may sound like a simple thing, but it completely changes combat and the way you navigate this world. Exploring the lands between over like 200...
I do wish the jump was integrated a bit more holistically into the game. Obviously, it's pretty decent for like the torrent traversal and a lot of like the parkour stuff, but just like for combat in general, jumping attacks are extremely strong. So I guess I should probably like rephrase what I said, but I'm just kind of like failing to find the words, I guess, right now.
Hours rivaled the experience I had exploring the first half of Dark Souls 1. They both hit really hard, but for different reasons. The first half of Dark Souls 1 hits hard because of a lack of a fast travel safety net, meaning you become very intimate with your surroundings and the world design nearly suffocates you with its complexity. It suffocates in a good way. Elden Ring hits hard not only because it marks the return of multiple areas connecting to each other with a very non-linear path of progression, but because of just the sheer scale of the world. But because the sheer scale and intrigue of always wanting to see what's around the next corner is such a big part of this experience, much like Breath of the Wild, the game won't ever hit quite as hard on subsequent playthroughs because that main draw of discovery is no longer there. This doesn't mean you should.
And I think part of the way that could have been fixed is having like the evolving world idea, like I mentioned earlier in the stream, where depending on the player's actions, it could influence the types of enemies and their attacks and all that kind of a thing. So yeah.
Shouldn't play multiple playthroughs of this game.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I really wish we had, Doctor, and the Goomba Stomp from Sekiro. So even though Jakey said that Elden Ring was influenced by Sekiro, apparently that's only half true, because there was an interview, I believe, where Miyazaki may have said that due to them being developed at about the same time, they couldn't integrate all of the lessons that they learned from Sekiro. So I wonder if like the Goomba Stomp was kind of a casualty of the simultaneous development, because I do think like Elden Ring could have just been like so much better if they had the Goomba Stomp as well as limb breaks, and obviously like a little bit of a better stance and posture system to make it a bit more intuitive or interactive for players to get feedback on. So between those three things, and if they added in a couple trick weapons instead of like having an Ash of War, it could like transform and stuff, that would have like really raised the game a tier in my mind, which isn't to say like the game is a low tier game by any means. It's just like I said earlier, like they took one step back and then took two steps forward. So there's like a little bit of progress, but also like not as much progress as I think they could have made, if that makes any sense.
Because, oh my god, weapons and spells and armor sets and Ashes of War and summoning salt videos, quest lines that you can super easily miss, and you will because they're super convoluted and hard to follow. You should definitely play the game a second time. But I will say that on my second playthrough, I definitely wasn't as eager to revisit all of the content once I knew what was exactly around every corner. Elden Ring has a massive amount of unique and amazing content to experience. But there's also some super not amazing content in there too. In Joseph Anderson's review, which is great by the way, he talks about how amazing his first fight with a dragon was. And I
think it's a little bit ironic for this stream to show like the death birds for the not amazing content, because on my 1.0 playthrough, I definitely crashed on this consecrated snowfield deathrite bird. So anyway, a little bit of salt in the wound for getting my ass kicked live on stream on a playthrough where I just steamrolled everything with the abuse of Hoarfrost Stomp instead of like Terra Magica. Oops.
completely, which is great, by the way. He talks about how amazing his first fight with a dragon was. And I completely agree. That first encounter with the dragon in that big-ass wet field or whatever, and he's like breaking all of the physics objects. It's amazing. It's such an awesome gameplay moment that is just naturally experienced in your exploring of the world. But I also agree with Joseph's point that because the game ends up having like a billion other dragons that you find, there's seriously so many dragons, and they all mostly have the same moveset, it kind of takes away a bit of the oomph of that first experience. It doesn't
take away the oomph of the first experience for me, but every subsequent dragon that I face in a FromSoft game, I just have like dragon fatigue of. So by the time I fought Placidusax even, I was like, oh, another dragon. Because pretty much all of the draconic fights in the FromSoft games play the same, with the exception of Fortisax, because like you can't just stand by his feet, which is, I mean, it makes sense from a certain point of view. It just really annoyed me because it's not fun fighting dragons melee, I guess, especially when you can't get into a comfortable melee range and punish the dragon as much as you'd like. Midir is kind of different from the other dragons, of course, but I mean, fundamentally you can get by his feet and like hit him, compared to like Fortisax, and Midir still has like a lot of similarities to these ones. So I am a bit dragoned out because they're just all too similar for me, I guess. Don't drop any hot takes while you're gone. Too late. Placidusax also has the AoEs that make you move. Yes, but I mean, all of the dragons essentially have some AoE that makes you move. Like, this is an AoE that makes you move, except, you know, like now you can use a horse, so it's a little bit easier to get away from. Granted, like, Placidusax has the nuke and stuff, but it's really not that different than, like, the Midir fight in some ways. So rather than, like, worrying about laser beams, well, you do have laser beams to worry about. So anyway, you just have like the extra nuke, which instead of like a bunch of humanity sprites is like almost a literal nuke, which is super cool. Don't get me wrong, like the fight is cool. It's just unfortunately overstayed its welcome. And like Placidusax wasn't particularly difficult. I did kill him my first try, but to be fair, I'd already killed Melina at that point. So I did stop leveling after I killed her, because I'd heard through the grapevine that like she was the most difficult boss. And I was like, oh, if I can kill the most difficult boss, I'll just like stop leveling now rather than just completely over leveling the content. So, and I'd stopped using my spirit summons just because I missed out on some of the challenge by like using a spirit summon against Margit the first time I fought him. So I killed him really easily, and then I felt kind of like it was too cheap for me. So that's just how I wanted to enjoy the game, so that's just the way that I did it. But if anybody ever wants to use a spirit summon and somebody else gives you shit for it, just ignore them. You play games the way you want to play games because they're your entertainment. So you can feel free to feel entertained any way you like, and that's a perfectly valid way to interface with your entertainment medium. Methoda, welcome back to the stream. Even though you retracted your message. Even Dragon Age has less dragon fights? You get that fatigue? Okay. should be able to jump on them. Oh, like Shadow of the Colossus style. That would be super cool too. Yeah. Placidusax has the AoEs in the sense you cannot spam him. He also has the backwards flamethrower. Yeah, and none of those are like super different, but yeah. Dragon fights are a weird thing in basically every game. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, how do you realistically fight something in the sky unless you're like using ranged options? It's just very unlikely unless you have something almost akin to like a quick time event to like jump on them or something like that. What's that new game that's coming out? Like Blasphemous 2, I think. It looks like it has some really interesting ways to kind of mitigate that stuff. So you could potentially use things like spirit ashes or like magic to essentially like call down a dragon and like bind it to the earth, kind of like the Margit shackle or the Moog shackle. That would be another way of doing it, perhaps, or like setting up traps. So that actually reminds me that this is kind of a valid criticism that I know some fans of Demon Souls specifically lament about previous FromSoft games, is that there are a lot less environmental factors in dealing with enemies. So things like traps, ballistas, all that stuff. Not that Demon Souls had a ton of it, but they had a few more gimmick fights that made those feel a bit more prominent as for like features in a game, which I do think is a valid criticism, and that could be something that they could iterate on a bit further in their next titles, I guess. Oh, it's out? Wait, Blasphemous 2 is out? Let me look that up. I thought that one wasn't coming out for like... Oh, no, I'm thinking of something else. Oh, I'm so bad with names. Anyway, okay. Thanks for letting me know that. And welcome into the stream, Fume. Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking of something else. Dragon's Dogma. That's what it is, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think it's Dragon's Dogma, too, that I'm thinking of.
Doesn't mean that first experience is invalidated or made bad, but more so it's like if you ate pizza for dinner every night and eventually you were like, all right,
Nope, I love pizza. I'll eat it every night forever. With the caveat, of course, like if you have the same kind of pizza, it would definitely get old. One of the things that I enjoy the most about pizza is that there's so many topping options that it can feel a bit different depending on what you get. So anyway, I'll stop talking about food and being a food terrorist.
really want to eat dragon pizza anymore. Can we have like rat pizza, Mom? The same goes for a lot of Elden Ring's catacomb dungeons. Similar to the Chalice dungeons in Bloodborne or the shrines in Breath of the Wild, the quality of experience you might have in one of these copy-paste interiors is a bit of a dice roll. In all of the Souls games, you never know exactly what items you're going to find as rewards while exploring, but the areas and bosses are usually so interesting to look at and explore that the real reward is really just getting to experience that area and fight that cool boss. So even if the reward is something you're never gonna use, like another fucking spell, you don't really...
So yeah, that was one thing that I was going to bring up in relation to this. One thing that FromSoft does very well to softly incentivize players to exploring areas fully is having enemies drop items, whether they be like guaranteed drops like Doris's gnawing or just like upgrade items, because you never really know what the next enemy around the corner is going to drop. There is a bit of a push to go kill those enemies and explore fully, which I think is a really good game design where it's not like really forced down the player's throat mostly, but it's a good thing, I think. But it also can be frustrating when certain drop rates are extremely low in a single player game. I hate that.
Regret doing it because it was a really cool experience. The same does not apply to Elden Ring. All of these catacombs are not created equally. Some will have a cool and unique boss and a really useful piece of loot, and others will have a boss you've already seen a bunch of times and an item that you will forget about the second you leave the catacomb.
Actually, I should take it back a little bit, because within the catacombs, at least, there are a couple of like the pressure plate traps that can be used to damage enemies. So just except for like those very few things, it is still kind of lacking overall as far as like the full scope of the game. And of course, like the exploding barrels with like the warhawks throwing things at you, and like those are some environmental things, but it could be a little bit stronger. And of course, that's a little bit easier said than done by all means.
Funny enough, this is actually a problem that's remedied by a second playthrough, because if you have a wiki open, you can just avoid doing all the dungeons that aren't worth it. But on a first playthrough, the one that's the best and the most memorable, you don't know what all of these have. So if you're like me, you're probably going to do all of them and get pretty burnt out on fighting the same little statue fuckers and these pieces of shit.
Yeah.
For the most part, the enemy and boss variety on display in Elden Ring will blow your back out most of the time. But seeing unique experiences that you've cherished, like the reveal and spectacle of fighting Astel, natural born of the void, get copy-pasted into a separate dungeon, or fighting a godskin fucker, or both of them for like the 5th time, it's a bit disappointing. The nice thing about Elden Ring though is that you technically don't have to do most of this. If a boss is too hard or if an area is too annoying for you, you have so many other options of things to do and bosses to fight and places to see. But this also potentially leads to some issues with the game's design. Previous Souls games that had a more linear progression path could quickly...
Nectarine said, setting the Halig tree on fire removes Millennia Scarlet Rot debuff. Yeah, that'd be interesting, and it just kind of reminds me of like the Mytha fight in Dark Souls 2, where if you set fire to the windmill, her poison pools disappear. Go figure, but yeah.
halt your progress with a super tough boss, and you would have to either grind enemy mobs for souls to level up or just slam your head against a wall until you hopefully eventually break through. Elden Ring, being mostly non-linear, actually remedies that problem and finally adds a sort of difficulty slider to the Souls games. If a boss is giving you a swirly, just go do something else. Maybe find a better weapon, learn some new skills, or spend time practicing your parries against weaker bosses. I don't know, there's a lot of stuff you could do. Then once you're better prepared, head on back to that boss that was fucking you up and say, "It's opposite day, you slug." Huzzah! That's pretty amazing, right? This makes the game so much more accessible and less intimidating to a new player that's never been beaten to death by a rat before. But this system of sort of choosing your own difficulty could also potentially rob you of a compelling experience. This game is so goddamn big that there's bound to be stuff in the early areas that you won't find until way later in the game. And when you do find it, maybe it's a super awesome, unique boss battle with like a really cool reward that you beat in like 2 hits. In some cases, this feels amazing. It fully feeds into the power fantasy of wanting to make the biggest fucker alive, and can be super satisfying to just totally fart on a boss that once had you breaking 2x4s from Menards over your leg. But sometimes
the Ness sound effect. I guess it's just like a baseball bat in Smash. Anyway, yeah. Stella, he is on an exercise ball. Indeed. The exercise ball is kind of his thing, yeah. If Elden Ring had faction influence and scaling for enemies, this issue could be alleviated. Yeah, so like I said, when I first fought Margit, I had like already explored most of Limgrave, most of Weeping Peninsula, and a decent chunk of Caelid as well. But I couldn't upgrade my weapon at that point, but I had like a +2 weapon, but I still like over leveled, and I used my spirit summon, and then I like one-shot him. It was really easy, so I was like, I felt bad. So then I like stopped using my spirit summons after that, except, wait. I don't remember if I fought and got my ass kicked by the Divine Tower in Caelid's Godskin Apostle. There's a good possibility that's what happened, and that's probably why I was like overpowered. No, because I feel like no, I think I must have done that one later. So the Caelid Divine Tower Godskin Apostle was the enemy that like made me actually break down and level up my spirit ashes, because I was only like level 40 or like 42 or something when I fought him, and he destroyed me over and over because he would like kill my skeleton in one hit. So I was like, man, this sucks. I'm kind of curious like how much HP the skeletons get per level, and I was like convincing myself I could just level them up one level at a time to see if how how much HP they get, and I could document it. And it was just me like trying to cope. Anyway, they did this in Armored Core 6. Okay, Armored Core's design where siding with different corporations changes things up would be amazing to see in Elden Ring. Okay. Yeah, so if they add in something like that with the DLC, that would probably be like, maybe not like the quote unquote best thing that they could do for the DLC, but if they're able to transform the world that they already have to a degree to make it feel fresh and dynamic, that would probably be like the most ridiculous thing that they could do. And I know some players don't want them to just like kind of reskin old areas. They want like completely new content. But I feel like no matter what FromSoft does, they can't please everybody. They can't please anybody. So yeah, they're just kind of like, we just gotta let them cook. I guess that's really what it comes down to. Can't wait for Shadow of the Erdtree to just be a lighting engine update. Yeah, okay. I see what you did there. All right, okay, guys. Apparently ads are going to run in like 20 seconds, so heads up. I'll stop talking now, and I'll like play the video. So, all right, here we go.
Sometimes it can feel underwhelming and disappointing. I think the fact that the game doesn't have level scaling for enemies is much better than an alternative where it did. Because level scaling can often make a game world feel pretty artificial and your progression feel pretty meaningless. But I do think there's a world where you could have a bit of both. I think if you visit areas in the game that you're very obviously over-leveled for, the game could maybe flash a little prompt that says, hey, do you want to make this fight scale to your level to maybe make it a bit more satisfying, and maybe we give you extra runes as a reward for upping the difficulty? I would love that. Mark Brown of Game Maker's Toolkit makes a great point in his video about how Hollow Knight actually changes the layout of early areas and ups the difficulty of enemies to keep things more challenging and interesting later in the game. And I think
so hopefully that's been enough time, like 30 seconds or so, for me to like make my comments with the ads over, hopefully. In that, yeah, scaling is something that's extremely difficult to handle. I did play World of Warcraft during the Legion expansion, and it was a bit of a double-edged sword that they had turned on scaling for the world enemies, because when I was going through like the main quests, scaling was pretty much like the best thing that could like ever happen for the game, because it made each area that I go to feel relevant and not like a pushover, and I could explore the different zones at my own leisure, which was definitely a good thing. Except once I finally hit max level, the scaling scaled to such a degree that the enemies that I was killing normally were just kind of like pushovers, all of a sudden became way more difficult and took me a lot longer to face solo. So that way I got outscaled by the enemies, which felt terrible. And a bunch of players did the math and discovered like the most efficient way to deal with the overscaled enemy mobs was just to like remove your least effective piece of equipment. So players would have like be at their max level, like have like their max stats and whatnot, except they would remove like a ring, so that way the scaling enemies were just able to die faster. So like the tuning for it was broken. So my point here is scaling it was the problem, but it also wasn't the problem. It's just like the balance of the scaling is just that's the real $1 million question right there. And I don't even think I'm exaggerating by saying it's literally $1 million question. Like, how do you make scaling feel rewarding but not broken? All right, Chadwick, you have a good Merry Crimbus, whatever is left of it, and hopefully we'll catch you on the next stream tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. When you heard it was George R.R. Martin and then he played the game, you knew the end game would be a personal fight for the throne. We are a tyrant. The tarnished is the all-powerful despot. Miquella will be the savior. But the player is Miquella, don't you know? More lore likes Dark Souls 2's jumping more than Elden Ring's. It's crossing vertical gaps horizontally, not for ascending. So there are aspects of Dark Souls 2's jump that I do like. It does have like the longest distance jump, which is pretty good. But yeah, I feel like if Elden Ring incorporated some more of the lessons from Sekiro with like a Goomba stomp or like being able to jump a second time, like maybe off like a surface, so you could just like kick off a wall and then just like, you know. Anyway, I don't need to go down that route. It would it could have improved the game. Maybe not improved the game, but it could have like made it a bit more satisfying, perhaps. Yeah, I've heard of Joseph Anderson's video, and I thought about like watching it on stream, except it looked extremely long. I might do that sometime, but who knows? This is a struggle anime has faced for over 40 years. How the hell is Goku still fighting people at his level? That is the true insight right there, isn't it? Well, you see, what had happened was Dr. Gero, he took a little bit of Goku, and a little bit of Vegeta, and a little bit of Gohan, and a little bit of Frieza, and then he combined them into the perfect cell.
That's a great example of something that Elden Ring could have potentially done as well. Speaking of rune rewards for defeating enemies, holy shit, they are all over the place in this game and make like zero fucking sense. Donkey talks about this in his Elden Ring video, and I wholeheartedly agree. Like, the difficulty of an enemy.
I don't know if I've ever actually watched Donkey's video, but I fully agree that it feels ridiculous when you go to the northern part of Caelid into the Dragon Barrow, and you kill the little pygmy dudes with like one visceral attack and get like 8,000 runes, whereas like that's as many runes as like Godric gives you when you kill him, you know? Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but yeah, there's definitely an imbalance with the areas. Like, going from southern Caelid to northern Caelid is a hell of a wake-up call when that's like a level like 120 plus area, and there's just like no real indicators that you're gonna be in for a bad time, you know?
Enemy does not correlate to how much money you get for defeating them. It's honestly ridiculous in a lot of cases. Also, let's talk about respeccing stat points. Once you defeat Renala at the Wizard Academy Raya Lucaria, you unlock a way to use specific larval tier items to reallocate all of the stat points that you've spent money on, and this is amazing. This means that if you find a weapon or spell that you really fuck with but don't have the stats for, you can retool your character to be able to use them and switch up your playstyle and experience one of the many amazing builds that you can do in this game. So why the fuck can't you do the same thing with weapons? Elden Ring offers no way of transferring or respeccing weapon upgrades from one weapon to another, and it makes zero fucking sense to me. You find so many fucking cool weapons in this game.
So, unironically, I believe the reason for that is because the devs were struggling at figuring out a way to make sections of the game continue to feel rewarding, and so they're like, oh, you know, just throw down like the smithing stones, and that's a lot of the reward. Except it sucks, and it really sucks how prohibitive the cost is for changing your weapons and stuff like that. And to even go further than Nakey Jakey, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that the amount of rebirth currency is hard capped by each new game cycle that you can do, because you can only get a certain amount of the larval tiers for each game cycle.
And it is a total pain in the ass to make switching to them actually viable. Yes, you can find the smithing bells that let you buy an unlimited amount of upgrade resources from the merchant, but A, what if you don't find some of those bells on your first playthrough where you're not looking stuff up? And B, I don't understand what the harm would be in letting you get back some of your upgrade resources from a weapon if it meant that that weapon went back to its base level.
And then I was one of those players who missed out on like the bells super early. So what I had done was I went through a lot of Limgrave, then I met Blythe and then did the Darrowell thing. And then Blythe was like, oh yeah, tell the blacksmith I said hello. And I'm like, oh shit, there's a blacksmith? I have some weapons. They could be upgraded. I'm gonna go find them. So I screwed off and went around Stormvale, and then I went to Liurnia, where I just like screwed around for a while. I think I found EG. No, 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 no. First, I found the right Lucarian tunnels that are on like the east side. So I got like the next upgrades worth of like materials there, but I had no way to upgrade my weapons because that outscaled Limgrave's scaling. So I did like Liurnia, and then I went back down to like Limgrave, and then I went to Kaled, and so I still couldn't upgrade my weapons. So I had like a +2 weapon for the longest of times. And then eventually, I don't remember exactly. I think I broke down and like looked it up because like I missed the part where I could get the upgrade thing. So I looked up where I could get either the bell bearing or something like that. And so I got it. And then I went from a +2 to a +14 weapon. And it was just kind of completely unnecessary. And so I don't think there's like the best solution that you could do with the current paradigm of the game and like having proper reward structures for players. I think, having a permanent upgrade option, so like all of your weapons got upgraded to +1, +2, plus whatever, would be very smart, but it would probably break parts of the game in unanticipated ways. So my kind of temporary like workaround would be having like the traveling merchants have weapons that are more on par with the area that they're at, because in general Elden Ring doesn't do the best job of indicating how tough any given area is supposed to be. So if you could potentially buy the upgrade materials from the merchants or buy a weapon that is at like a certain capacity, so like if you go to like Liurnia and then the merchant there sells like a +5 weapon, you'd be like, oh, okay, so this is kind of where they're at, and that might give you a chance to like deal with that area, I guess. But of course, like the drawback would be, well, hey, what's stopping somebody from going directly to Altus Plateau, getting a +15 weapon, and then going back to Limgrave? Well, I hate to break it to you guys, but you can break the game like 1,000 different ways, so you could just add it to the pile of game breaks, I guess. So maybe it's not the most elegant solution, but it is, I think it's a decent one. But of course, I'm going to be partial to my own ideas here. All right, so let me get rid of the notes here. Okay. Overleveling is a problem, but scaling enemies your level is absolutely not the solution. In fact, worse. So yeah, it can be better or worse. It just takes balancing, and there's a large margin for it to go wrong. It'd be cool if there are items like an invisibility cloak or immunities, like if you go through a certain quest and get immunity to certain debuffs. So there's a couple of things like that, but yeah, they could have. You're not wrong. It would be nice to be able to like break the game a bit more directly there. So yeah, an invisibility cloak could be a thing. And of course, stuff like that could be more included in the DLC. Obviously, it's a bit of a meme to say like the DLC will have it, but even though I don't really think it, they did have certain things kind of in the vein of that, like added into the DLC of like Dark Souls 3. Maybe not like a full-on invisibility cloak, but more utility type stuff, I guess. So I'm sure there'll be something that'll surprise us. Having an Ember system like in Dark Souls 1 would help. So technically there is with the rune arcs, which I never used because I'm a hoarder. So I talked a lot about that yesterday, my hoarding problems, but yeah. Alright, going back to the video.
Right? You would be so much more excited to find shit, even if it's something out of your typical wheelhouse. The Resident Evil 4 remake, which is fantastic, by the way, I talk about it on my second channel, Jaquan the Jeek will like, subscribe, rate, comment, 5 stars, lets you sell weapons you've upgraded back to the merchant, and you get most of the money that you've put into upgrading that weapon, which is amazing. So why can't Elden Ring have the same thing? Another thing that can feel so ass backwards and outdated are the NPC side quests and how you progress them. These games have always had super convoluted NPC side quests, and I know it's partly because Miyazaki knows that with the internet, everyone's gonna get together and figure it out so you can afford to make it complicated and whatever. I get that. But I still think that some of these more basic ones should be doable by just using your common sense. It's one thing to have NPCs not progress their dialogue or do something until you go rest or leave the area when it's a smaller, more linear game. But it's an entirely different thing to have that same bullshit in a massive open world game where people are supposed to move around from place to place, but will never do it while you're watching them. So you gotta go rest at a bonfire and then wait, no, wait, I messed up. You gotta rest again to load the guy in because it's not nighttime if you rested and then died and then came back. Like, what the fuck? I went where the fucker told me to. Why does this require so many other extra unseen steps? I only bitch and moan about this because the writing and voice acting in this game is so good, like so heartbreakingly good, and because the storytelling and lore bits are so few and far between, you'll fucking chase after whatever scraps you can find. But at the end of the day, I make these videos to criticize the things that I love. Video games. I love them so very much. And I love Elden Ring more than most other video games. I am so eternally grateful to be alive in the same timeline that FromSoftware is cranking out games of this quality. Elden Ring is not only a continuation of the Dark Souls franchise, it is an evolution of FromSoftware's trailblazing game design. A design that I think defined the last 10 years of gaming, and with Elden Ring could very well define the next 10 years of gaming as well. A massive journey with some of the most beautiful vistas I've seen since Windows Vista, and some of the most challenging, grueling bosses that I've taken on and overcome since Windows Vista. Thank you to Hidetaka Miyazaki and FromSoftware for taking a chance with Demon's Souls. Thank you for making some of my favorite games ever made. And thank you for watching this video. I'll see you later, gamers.
All right, so that was another great video by Nakey Jakey.
FromSoftware's
I'm going to go ahead and link this into the chat if you guys want to go ahead and give him a like and or a sub. Let me do that myself. I'm not subscribed, at least not on this account, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. He's got a lot of really interesting videos, so yeah, I don't really feel like you need any more of an introduction than you just received right there. So yeah, I definitely talked about this video a lot longer than I was expecting, but I mean, that's just how good it is, and just how, what's the word? Not insightful, but just, not incendiary, but something along those lines. Just how, anyway, I'm going to move past it. So, the last bit about the quest, it's kind of funny because then, who said it in chat? Clownscum said, it's okay, you can say Millicent's Quest, it's always Millicent's Quest. Ironically enough, I didn't actually have any issues with Millicent's Quest. I did pretty much all of it blind on my first playthrough, but it was just kind of a bit of a fluke, I admit, and I do wholeheartedly agree that in a game with the scope of Elden Ring, the quests should have been a lot clearer in the way that they were presented to the player. But one of my, I don't want to say like a complaint, but one of my misgivings about Elden Ring is just actually how few NPCs there actually are for a world as large as it is. It feels like you have the amount of Dark Souls 1's NPCs in a world that's at least 10 times larger than Dark Souls 1. So it feels a bit more barren because there's a lot less interactions. I do wish there were like more towns or something like that in Elden Ring, or like settlements, because it makes the world feel a bit more fleshed out to me personally. So anyway, the quests that I did ruin my first time through were Nefeli's quest, because Gustok stopped selling me items, and I like already went through Liurnia, and I went back, I got to Altus Plateau. There's nothing going on, so I just killed him because I wanted his bell bearing to see what else was in his shop. And so I like screwed up the Nefeli Lu quest line because I didn't know any better. But joke's on me, like that quest line wasn't fully integrated into the game at that point when I'd done it. So I couldn't do anything about it. But anyway, that was just a really convoluted one. I think that was pretty much the only one that I really messed up my first time through. But I definitely messed up Hayata's quest. Well, that's kind of a lie. I didn't mess up her quest. I missed her quest entirely, and I'd killed every enemy in Liurnia. So when I talked to Hayata and she told me to get the fingerprint grape, I couldn't go and kill Vike at the time because he wouldn't invade the world because invasions were tied to how many like bosses were in the area. So anyway, I couldn't kill Vike to get the fingerprint grape to give to Hayata to finish that aspect of the Frenzied Flame quest. So those are the two that I really messed up. Oh wait, I think I also messed up Yura's. So I actually did mess up a few quests now that I'm like really taking stock of it. And the reason why I messed up a Hayata's quest is because I had already gone to Liurnia before I went to Weeping Peninsula, like all the way down to Castle Morn. So it's just like one of the casualties of exploring the world too fully because I didn't really have any incentive to go back to that section of Liurnia where Hayata was. This was the Dark Souls of video essays? No, the real Dark Souls of video essays is Mauler's response to Matthew Matosis for Dark Souls 2. Something you feel is drastically underutilized is telling someone's destination through an item description. You're not wrong, but it is kind of comical how many people don't even bother to read the item descriptions, so they run into the exact same issue regardless. I do think a recurrent issue in all of the FromSoft games is like when an NPC says something, they only say it once. So if you're not paying attention or like not taking note of what they said and you miss it, you're screwed. That kind of happened to me with Latenna when I got to the consecrated snowfield. I don't exactly remember what like distracted me, whether it was like the dog or like the wind blew a different direction and my mind just followed it. I don't really remember, but she started talking to me in the consecrated snowfield and I wasn't expecting it. So by the time like my attention got like shifted back to the game, she was pretty much finishing what she had to say. So I was like, well, I have no idea what the hell she just said, and that could have been really important. So, right. The reason I started the whole story with like the Millicent stuff is I didn't have problems with Millicent's quest line, so I completed it, right? Not exactly, because when I finished her quest line, I jumped down the cliff to go see her in Elfile, and then I killed her. So she just died. I went through all of that work and she died. And had I not been save scumming the game, I would have been extremely crestfallen, I guess, to have such a long, arduous quest come to such an anticlimactic ending. I actually have it archived on my channel. Let me look it up so I could just share it with you guys really quickly. I think it's called I Can't Believe It Ends Like This or something like that. It's literally her quote. Oh, I did not imagine it ending like this. Let's do this. Alright, so here we go, guys. The end of Millicent's quest.
I did not imagine it ending like this, but I will not forget what you have done.
So I don't want to get copyrighted again by that stupid soundtrack at the end there. So yeah, that's how my Millicent quest would have ended originally if I didn't save scum my game. And I do absolutely wish that all of the FromSoft games had a multi-save slot feature, because I don't think it makes the game better by not having it. And I will like literally fight anybody who says that they don't want that in the game and it's better without it, because you are literally ruining my experience with that kind of talk right there. So anyway. Yeah, FromSoft gave her deflector shields. Not when I went through the game. Doing a long chain quest and the NPC dying. You wonder when that happened? You also don't like how FromSoft ends their quests with characters just dying in this game? Yeah. No, I didn't imagine it ending like that either. So, okay. That was a fantastic video by Nakey Jakey. I'm going to go ahead and link it into the chat again. And then we shall move ahead to the best Zelda game I've ever played by Moxie Watts. All right. The copium-fueled parody, Zelden, Ring of the Meme.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Is it canon? To which I say, don't worry about it. The Zelda devs clearly don't. This game got the Gotti for a reason. Zelden Ring. This game is beautiful. Now, I know what you're thinking. Mox, this isn't even made by Nintendo. To which I say, it's fine. There are tons of other Zelda games made by different studios. But Mox, where would it go in the timeline? Don't worry about it. Y'all are sleeping on this game. Link. Link, wake up. You have to go to the Deku Tree. The divine holy relic, the Triforce. It was shattered. I know, Hyrule looks different.
Oh no, I see the parallels.
But hasn't it always looked different? That's beside the point. Here's the secret plate. Take Epona. Go to the Deku Tree. Epona already has the instant Sheikah horse spear built into the model. Look at It's real important that you go to the Deku Tree. But first, you might want to find Impa. She's at the Sheikah Academy. It doubles as Hogwarts. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this.
Link, 私を探して。
What?
She said, Link, look for me.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the one I was
Remember in the old
expecting.
games hitting every...
I wondered if it was going to be like more of a video essay, but apparently it's more of like a parody video, which is interesting.
wall for the sake of triple checking because sometimes they sounded different and there was a secret room. Yeah, we got those. The Sheikah upgrades are pretty choice. There's so many different sorceries and incantations to discover in all different kinds of caves and dungeons. Imagine. And look, I know what you're wondering. Do my weapons break? The answer is no. There are tons of random places in these dungeons that use switches and levers, some of which are hidden behind walls.
So one of the things that I still haven't done is gone back and played like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. And one of the reasons why I didn't want to do that is because like the weapon durability system, it just really kills a lot of my very low interest to begin with, just because like this might be a controversial thing to say, but like the world of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom just looked a little bit too dull or lifeless for me to like really get into him. And I have to deal with the cell shading because like honestly, when I look at some aspects of Elden Ring, I can't really pinpoint why it feels different to me than like Breath of the Wild does, but there's just something different about them for me at least. And just to add some more fuel to the fire, I also couldn't really bring myself to get into Hollow Knight for a similar reason. It's just not an art style that I can get into. There's just something about like the way that the backgrounds like meld into the foreground where it just doesn't, it just like got the Nope vibe for me. And it's kind of like similar to how like old school cartoons like Dexter's Lab changed their art style midway through and it just didn't work for me. So anyway, it's kind of a weird tangent to go on, so I apologize for all of you whom I may have offended. Alright, Moxie's Elden Ring's videos are pretty legit. They've got some solid lore theory videos too. Yes, Flip Flop, welcome into the stream. We'll actually be watching one of her lore videos next after this one. I just made an enemy for life. Not the first one. Because I'm the last one. All right, anyway.
Some of the
Hey,
travel
Morlord,
elements
welcome back
use
to the
chest
present.
And will teleport you to super random places like, where am I? There's like a bazillion different dungeons and caves with their own secrets and lore. And there's a bunch of optional NPC quest lines that you can do with a lot of fascinating endings. Most of the time you'll be wondering, what does this button do? Or, what's this thing on the horizon? And the punchline is, well, epic.
All right, real talk. Seeing Moog's mausoleum
What's
there
this thing on the
was infuriating for me because I could also see like the Crucible Knight up there. So I spent so many hours my first time down in the Shifra River looking for the way to get up there, only to later discover that there was no way to get up there from where I was. It's a completely like late game type thing unless you know do the whole Bari questline stuff. So anyway, yeah, I don't know how I feel about that because like in most of like the Dark Souls games, when you see an area or something, there's like it kind of serves as an environmental hint that you want to explore fully if you see something but can't get to it immediately. So seeing something like this, I was kind of trained to like look for the way to get up there, but there was no way. So I just kind of like wasted a lot of time for no real reason, I guess.
horizon? And the punchline is, well, epic. Yeah, the game is much harder than most Zelda games, but I will say the hardship just makes the game that much better to overcome. I mean, I became a Zelda Lord, and trust me, I'm terrible at games. Whoa. Bye. Oh.
It must take so long to edit these videos. Holy crap.
So if you're worried about difficulty, don't. Guess what? You can summon sages from the past to help you fight. Isn't that so funny, quirky, and legally distinct? Kinda makes you wonder why they delayed Tears of the Kingdom in the first place. Almost like they shoehorned in a storyline that wasn't there as a direct inspiration from this game, and then put it into their own game, which took another 8 months to do because deep down we all knew they were never gonna win the Gotti anyway. Hyrule Field, Gerudo Desert,
Shots fired.
Death Mountain. This is Hyrule Castle, right? Zora's Domain. Don't ask questions. Vague ancient destroyed civilizations? We got them. There's like several of them. Weird vague time mechanics? We got them. Look kid, this gold stuff, it's your life force. I know it's not green, but this could be some kind of weird parallel world thing. Don't ask questions. The depths? We got them. I mean, literally. Look at the name on the map. This place also has vague ancient civilizations. There's Poes that actually whisper weird lore details from the past. People are unable to go to the afterlife, so they reincarnate. Wonder why? Now I know what you're wondering. Are there Skylands? Yes, sir. You know we got them. Zelden Ring. Zelden Ring. Now, I know what you're thinking. There cannot be Gleoks in this game. Gleoks? Oh yeah, you know we got them. Or maybe you're thinking, man, I wish there was a Darkling fight in Tears of the Kingdom. Or
Alright, so just like a channel content creator note, it looks like the the captions aren't fully synced up properly, or like bits of your script were missing, or you went off script, which isn't the biggest of deals, but there is a bit of a mismatch there, which you might want to fix or might not.
or any recent Zelda games, for that matter. Well, you know Zelden Ring's got it. How much better than that can it get? I don't think this game is canon because, like, you have to pick your own Master Sword, but that doesn't matter because it doesn't break. Wow. Disclaimer: do not mod your game. Mods bad. But for educational purposes only. You can play as Zelda if you want to. You can play as Twilight Princess Link. There's an easy mode if you think that the game is too hard, but you will get flamed for using it. Princess and a freaking Zelda. Her fate is halted by this guy, Ganon.
Oh no.
Yeah, Ganon. And he's actually infected by malice, and you have to fight Ganon in the desert to help your princess. And I know what you're thinking. The Ganondorf fight is pretty hype, but hear me out. Zelden Ring did this a year before, and look, man, this is the best Ganon fight ever. You get to summon all these dudes to help you fight, and I don't want to spoil the whole fight, but it gets pretty crazy in Phase 2.
That's interesting, because I remember, I mean, obviously it was a very long time since I played it. I might be misremembering which was which, but I think the Wind Waker, no, it was Twilight Princess, right? Where you're mounted. That Ganon fight was also really good. Man, it's been so long since I've actually played those two games. So I'm kind of curious, like, how the final Ganon fights were for, like, Skyward Sword or Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom.
That
was Twilight? Okay.
Nothing
I really
bad
like
at
that
all
one.
happens and the kingdom is totally saved. And that's why Zelden Ring is the best Zelda game I've ever played. On a real note though, clearly I'm super salty about the outcome of Tears of the Kingdom. And I blame Elden Ring. It set my expectations way too high for what Tears of the Kingdom was going to be. Elden Ring was inspired by the feel of Breath of the Wild. It took from what Breath of the Wild did well and expanded it into a world with deeply flawed characters and tons of hidden secrets. This game feels like a Zelda game, and an expansion is right around the corner. If you were disappointed by what Tears of the Kingdom had to offer, I think you should try playing Elden Ring. I promise the game is
Hey, you guys heard it here first from Moxie that the DLC is right around the corner. So if it's not right around the corner, go ahead and bring out the pitchforks and the torches, guys.
totally worth playing. And you Zelda nerds will absolutely dig it. It's like a mix of Twilight Princess meets Breath of the Wild. So if you like Elden Ring or other Zelda content, consider subscribing to the channel. It's free and it helps a ton. Thank you so much to my channel members. I have a Patreon in the description if you're interested in joining. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Okay, yeah, I always forget just like how long ago Breath of the Wild actually got released. So it looks like it came out finally in 2017, and then Sekiro came out in like 2019. So I think she's definitely right to say that Breath of the Wild probably did influence this game. And I'm sure there's probably also like some more like insider industry type stuff where devs are probably keeping tabs on like what other devs are doing. But I could be wrong about that. So anyway, that was a very interesting little video there. For anybody who isn't super familiar with Moxie's channel, like I've been saying, she's done like a lot of Zelda content. And after Tears of the Kingdom, she kind of became more disillusioned with it and is like transitioned into Elden Ring stuff. So I watched her video where she was more or less just complaining about ranting about it. Maybe I didn't see it. Maybe she took it down. Oh no, here it is. Yeah, so it's an hour long, a neurodivergent rant about my tears for the kingdom. So that one was really funny. I don't want to play Zelda anymore. I mean, I say funny in a kind of a schadenfreude sense because I don't have much of an attachment to Zelda. So in some ways it's pretty sad, and I am just kind of a jerk for laughing at it just because like the frustration is kind of funny. So yeah, I kind of feel bad for like saying that out loud right now, but it's just kind of like how I felt because I don't have a dog, pun intended, in this race. So anyway, let's go ahead and link this video to the chat if you guys enjoyed it, and you guys can give her a like and a sub if you feel so inclined. And the next we'll be moving into her video about Melina as an Empyrean. Okay. Oops.
Are you ready to commit a cardinal sin?
Melina takes in the flame. Her hands have been burned before, which has haunted me. This poses some questions. When did Melina become burned and bodiless?
I feel like just pausing and sighing, not because of like her questions, but just because of like, if only we knew the answers to some of these most basic questions. And this is one that's extremely arguable because if Melina is burned and bodiless, the question of when it happened is paramount to gaining a deeper understanding of like the potential inner workings of the Erd Tree and or Melina as a potential daughter of Marika, amongst all these other tangential issues which go along with that. So what I mean by like tangential issues that go along with that is if Melina was burned on the transition from the Crucible Age to like the full on like Golden Order Age or whatever you want to call it, because even like that much is contentious. That could get contradicted because Melina should have been born at the foot of the Erd Tree, which means the Erd Tree should have already been around. So does that necessarily mean that Melina was like after Godfrey's time that she got burned? And is she like more of a contemporary with Radigan? Is she Radigan and Marika's child? There's just a lot of different ways you can look at this question and come up with different answers, which some are going to be a little bit more plausible than others, but ultimately it really just comes down to individual preference and just headcanon as per usual in the FromSoft games. Morlor says, oh boy, this topic is going to be convoluted and divisive. Wouldn't have it any other way. Phalad says, thoughts on Marika and maybe all the Newman being dragons that took a humanoid form, hence their stone-like bodies? So that's a very interesting question. I've thought about it, but I haven't tried to entertain it too seriously. Not because I dislike it or anything like that, but just because it's just like one of those what-if questions where it can make sense. But even if we do have that kind of information, I'm not entirely sure how much more that influences our understanding of the lore. That might help a bit more with like some of the Nox stuff, perhaps, because if they're like looking into Gravelstone and they're like related to Newman and like they made Dragonkin soldiers out of the Gravelstone, is that like a way for them to like have children? There's like a lot of stuff that can go along with it, but it's just kind of all too speculative for me to like really want to walk down each road individually. Hey, Hunterman plays Pokemans. Welcome in. Who is Zelden? Link is Zelden. That's who. You're praying to all the Outer Gods for peace of Melina lore in the DLC. I can't wait till the DLC gets released and goes in a completely different direction, answers none of the original questions, and then just asks more questions about what is new in the DLC, as is tradition. Obviously, Melina is Velka. The simple truth explains everything. Truly, our eyes were yet to open.
Does this imply a cyclical nature? What happens to the lands between, in the future, or in the past? I am Moxie, and this is Heavy Speculation.
My purpose was given to me by my mother.
I have never been satisfied with the theories about Melina being the Glowmide Queen or Ronnie Mommy's other half. For one, the Glowmide Queen has always appeared to have been felled. To address the other half of the sentiment, Ronnie and Melina of course share incredibly similar features, their eyes being the most prominent. This may have more to do with them being burned and bodiless than the likelihood of them being the same person.
So is there the possibility that Ronnie was cursed? If so, whom was she cursed by? Was it the fingers? Is that why she like rebelled against them? That's something I haven't really considered too much myself. Part of the reason I bring this up now is because not necessarily that Melina is cursed by like the fire giants, but there is that potentiality with burning down the Erd Tree, releasing Destined Death, could be like releasing the fire giants of like their curse. That could have been like something related to that. It could be a curse related to Destined Death, and obviously like Ronnie unbinds destined death to a degree to follow her fate. We have curses related to eyes with Marika and Radigan's sword seals and scar seals. So I'm kind of wondering why I never like really gave more thought to this being a similar kind of curse mark. Maybe it's because this is like more of a spirit thing, but I'll probably need to think about that a bit more. Not that like Moxie entirely brought it up that way. It's just kind of like something that ran through my mind just now.
Them being burned and bodiless than the likelihood of them being the same person. Perhaps it's a seal preventing their spirits from being returned to the cycle, allowing both of them to remain in their spectral forms. The works of Quelaag, Tarnished Archaeologist, and Smoketown greatly improved my understanding of Elden Ring, and their videos helped me clearly define my ideas. And we are just getting started, so if you like Elden Ring lore, consider subscribing to the channel. It's free, and it helps a ton.
All vessels are destined to one day break.
The outer gods are distinct from gods. Any god in the lands between serves an outer god. To become a god, one has to be a child of Queen Marika, a demigod. At least, that is, according to the Golden Order.
Good, I was about to pause the video and go on a tangent.
It's not always this way.
You must find kindling.
Even the flame of ruin doesn't make the thorns budge. We must unleash the rune of death. So that takes us to the sky. Legends speak of a storm roaring eternally, carrying the runes of a dignified imperial city. It is said that the ancient royal city of Fair Missoula has slowly been crumbling since time immemorial.
So I do like that it's at least quoted in the closed captions here. I do think it would be a little bit nicer if the quote was visually on screen as well, or like had a reference to what it's referring to, just so that people know that it's like a game quote rather than just something that Moxie is saying. So obviously, like this is like pretty small beans to worry about, but I think it's always just a little bit nicer to have the direct text and the associated reference to go along with it.
The ancient royal city of Fair Missoula has slowly been crumbling since time immemorial. Here, dragons swarm the sky. The ancient dragons, who ruled in the prehistoric era before the Erdtree, would protect their lord as a wall of living rock. Power gleaned from the remembrance of Dragonlord Placidusax transforms Caster into the Dragonlord to spew golden breath from above. These are the dying wails of a Dragonlord who once dwelled eternally beyond time. The death rites came after the Dynast civilization because they depicted the coming of a great tree, seen as they clutched their tablets like prophets, with vines growing from their feet. Then there's the rune's greatsword. Originally rubble from a ruin which fell from the sky, this fragment was honed into a weapon. The ruin it came from crumbled when struck by a meteorite. As such, this weapon harbors its destructive power. This gives us some point of context of when these ruins became airborne. There must have been so many meteor showers considering Radahn dedicated his life to stopping the stars. Great leaders learn from history. The Elden Ring, depicted in Malekith's boss chamber, perplexes me, though below this depiction appears to be a maiden praying, surrounded by 3 wolves. These immediately reminded me of the Shadowbound, almost like an ancient version. Shadowbound are assigned by the Greater Will to the Empyreans to keep them from straying away from their fate. Many people have speculated that this statue depicts the Glowmide Queen. According to the Black Flame ritual, the Glowmide Queen led the Apostles. It is said that she was an Empyrean, chosen.
That pose just kind of reminded me of Salt Bay for a second. So anyway, who said it? Oh yeah, Cav said YouTubers, when they realize all that stuff their high school English teacher was on about with those quotes and citations is their life now. Nah, for me it's more about like the fake symbolism is all like my life now. Oh, the fading of the conch shell in Lord of the Flies represents the loss of their civilization. Like, or it could just be the fading of a conch shell because time passes onward. So yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at right now, where I am talking about the fading of the conch shell when we examine the statue of a woman surrounded by three wolves. And that's not like a jab at Moxie, because I've done it on myself on my own Glowmide Queen video, so it just comes with the territory. The SpongeBob conch.
By the fingers. This never tells us whether or not she achieved godhood. From her title, it can be...
Also, the fact that these wolves are all toothless is just kind of really funny to me. When you have like the free cam, you can see just like how much they saved on like the assets, because like the mouths are kind of like hollow and you can like look in them and stuff. So not really relevant to anything.
Imply that she would have been a god based on Queen Marika being a god. But Elden Ring is vague on what being a queen in the lands between means. Queen Renala also carried this title. So there may be a queen below this depiction of an Elden Ring, but we can't be certain if it's hers, if it's conquered, or it's inherited.
Yeah, and that's one of the other things that's kind of annoying to parse with this whole mausoleum setup in Fair Missoula, whether or not the statue is placed after some kind of cultural shift, whether or not the depiction of the Elden Ring is placed after some kind of cultural shift, or if they're all native to Fair Missoula, and the implications of both kind of ideas is a little bit overwhelming in just like trying to come up with theories to match either, and also try to fairly entertain the other. So, right.
Be certain if it's hers, if it's conquered, or it's inherited. The roots of the great tree still cling to the bottom of Fair Missoula. According to the Black Flame ritual, the apostles once said to have served destined death are wielders of the god-slaying Black Flame, but after their defeat by Malekith, the Black Blade, the source of their power was sealed away. The Scouring Black Flame. The Black Flame that could once slay gods, but when Malekith sealed destined death, the true power of the Black Flame was lost. The Godslayer Greatsword. Sacred sword of the Glowmide Queen who controlled the Godskin Apostles before her defeat at the hands of Malekith. The black blade wielded by the Apostles are channeled from this sword. This sword tells us that Malekith felled the Glowmide Queen, who is a vassal of Marika. Marika wanted to seal death. But why?
So that, I think, is the first real leap that she did there, that the Glowmide Queen is a vassal of Marika. While there's certainly room for that interpretation, I feel like the language here is just a little bit stronger than the game allows for. Maybe that's a little bit too strong of phrasing myself there, but like there's certainly a number of arguments that can be made about it. But of course, Moxie did open the video by saying she disagrees that Melina is the Glowmide Queen. So where does that leave us? I guess I could still like make the argument, oh, maybe Marika is the Gek in response to Moxie here. But yeah, anyway, not too important, just me like being pedantic as usual.
Marika. Marika wanted to seal death. But why? Considering the Golden Order formed immediately following this event, it's safe to say that this was the goal that she was pursuing. There's a lot of time between the War of the Fire Giants and the Glowmide Queen's reign. The Elden Ring has taken many forms and is not immediately obvious to our Tarnished.
And the issue with like the Fire Giants and the Glowmide Queen's reign is also pretty contentious, because the real question is, when is the Rune of Death removed from the Elden Ring? When is it confined, as they say? And I don't mean in reference to Malekith. And that's kind of its own issue that's worth talking about, but I don't want to go down that road quite yet. So if destined death was sealed, or sorry, not sealed, but removed before the war against the giants, then the question becomes, why did Marika feel the need to fight the giants? Maybe because, the ruinous flame was still ruinous. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It seems more likely to me that destined death would have been removed from the ring after the war against the fire giants, which should have made the Glowmide Queen, at the very least, contemporaneous with that time.
The burning of the Earth Tree is the first cardinal sin. That is not the domain of mere men.
This comes from Fire's deadly sin incantation that also tells us the prophet despaired, looking up at the Erd Tree, for soon the kindling would burst into flame, bringing ruin. The Erd Tree can only be burnt using the flame of ruin within the mountaintops of the giants. There is more to explore about this flame. Perhaps the fire monks can reveal more. Fire monkhood. The fire monks are guardians.
So I do like the more proper attribution of like quotes now, because it's a bit easier to follow along if anybody wants to like look at those quotes directly, and gives players like a better understanding of the game text when they like when it's more tangible, I guess.
Of the flame of ruin, forbidden by the Erd Tree, and said to be kept high in the mountaintops of the giants. Monk's flame blade, curved sword with a flickering flame motif, wielded by the fire monks who came out from the mountaintops of the giants. The monks came to the land of Liurnia in pursuit of a fugitive who stole their fire. Who would steal it? What's their motivation? The Great Tree is now but a vast sprawling network of roots.
Aiden, he stole it. He's a jerk. That guy in Liurnia who's in the Everjail. One thing that I do like about the flame pellet Aiden's design is that, or Adon, I don't know how you really pronounce it, is that he has the fire pellet set on, except it's the altered form of it. So he's obviously like taken off the fire monk smock, and so he's just kind of like in the armor. But anyway.
But they still live. You have to imagine that the tree would have been massive, reaching high beyond the clouds because the roots reach every catacombs in the lands between. On the doors of the catacombs is one of the most important reliefs that gives us insight into the process of life and death. People are literally born from the tree, allegedly. Tarnished Archaeologist has an insightful look into this.
I like that. They're literally born from the tree, allegedly. Yeah, that almost feels like activating my trap card a little bit, because I'm kind of against it, but I don't know, like, if you want to make the argument that people coming out of the tree is also akin to, like, being reborn at a site of grace, I don't necessarily think it's entirely problematic. I think it's just a little bit awkward to me to say that, like, they literally, like, come from the branches up here, like, you get a full, like, tree person, even considering, like, how the Erd Tree Guardians are like half wood people. Adon? Okay. Interesting. Thank you. I appreciate that.
This whole perplexing topic if you're more interested in this line of thinking. For now, let's roll with it. The tree makes people. This marks clearly and distinctly that people existed in Fair Missoula, and the reason behind this style of birth taking place. The presence of the great tree roots in Fair Missoula is explained by this notion. And if we look at the Glowmide Queen's presence here...
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if those are, like, great tree as in Erd Tree roots, but I mean, this might also be contingent on the idea of a great tree predating the Erd Tree, and that's kind of its own can of worms to open there.
Is explained by this notion. And
Morlor says, take bets on what she thinks of the great tree, judging by her TA opinion sharing. It's all good. I mean, I think it's fine to reference the things that have influenced you, because it makes it a lot easier for us, especially, to follow what she's saying, since she is being very clear about her inspirations here.
If we look at the Glowmide Queen's presence here, it gets wonderfully complex. The most plausible answer, it burned down.
O Erd Tree, you shall burn.
Marika rigged the system so no one else could take it. This is when the Elden Ring would take its new form. This is how the process of budding was able to take place, as so eloquently highlighted by Tarnished Archaeologist. The Crucible Tree Helm sheds more light. Helm of the Crucible Knights who served Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. This turns out to be a little bit of history rewritten on behalf of the victors, I think, because Placidus Axe ruled as the first Elden Lord. Going back to the helm, the great tree ornamentation is the Knight Sluria's mark, displayed.
And so this I'm going to be pedantic about, even though I'm sure you guys have heard me talk about it multiple times over throughout, like, at least my previous streams. So for anybody who may be newer to the channel, I have some pretty vehement disagreements about this kind of version of history because, let's go ahead and pull up the quote. City's X. I know this would be the Old Lord Talisman, right? Okay, yeah. Nope, I'm wrong. Maybe I should read with my eyes. Okay, yeah. I just need to read with my eyes. So, in the remembrance of the Dragon Lord, we have the Dragon Lord whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the Erd Tree. So the way that I look at this kind of quote is we have what I would say is a form of hearsay in the usage of the term is said to have been Elden Lord. So this doesn't necessarily mean that Placidus Axe was not the Elden Lord, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that Placidus Axe was the Elden Lord. This is a kind of rumor that exists in the world, and its relation to fact is kind of irrelevant because it's talking about a belief or just kind of like a saying, essentially, that in the time before Godfrey, there was an Elden Lord, and if so, that Elden Lord was Placidus Axe. But in my opinion, this kind of hearsay should be outweighed in the descriptions talking about the first Elden Lord, which are all, explicitly said to have been Godfrey. So, first Elden Lord. This golden battle axe is emblazoned with the figure of a beast representing the strength of Godfrey, first Elden Lord and patriarch of the golden lineage. And the Japanese for like both the remembrance that we looked at earlier and this one is very like similar as far as like it's hearsay in the Japanese, it's definitive here. So let me rephrase that. It's hearsay in the remembrance in both Japanese and English. It's definitive in English here in the Japanese of the Axe of Godric. We've got Radahn set, the Elden Lord set all say that Godfrey is the first Elden Lord. And so with all of this using factual language, I don't feel as though I have the authority to kind of overlook or overwrite what this is saying. So I just kind of take it at face value and I just kind of roll with it. And so what else did she say? Oh yeah. So history rewritten on behalf of the victors. I want to re-listen to her quote or her dialogue here so that way I could address it properly.
To serve Godfrey, the free helm sheds more light. Helm of the Crucible Knights who served Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. This turns out to be a little bit of history rewritten on behalf of the victors, I think, because Placidus Axe ruled as the first Elden Lord.
So right, saying that history was rewritten by the Crucible Knights and whatnot, I understand the motivation for that, and I don't think that idea is entirely wrong, but for me personally, let's pull up the Crucible Knight set. The Greatsword's probably fine, but let's just go to the actual sets. Okay, the Crucible Axe Helm. So let's look at the tree, right? So we should, the tree helm. So the great tree ornamentation is the Knights Hilaria's mark, helm of the Crucible Knights who served Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. So because this language is so direct, I don't feel as though there's anything in the game that could really allow me to truly entertain the possibility of a different first Elden Lord, with the caveat that I think Placidusax can be like an Elden Lord, and he might have powers that could have been comparable to an Elden Lord, but the way that Placidusax may have wielded those powers may have been fundamentally different from the way the Elden Lords currently do, and that might be something that could be expanded upon further in the DLC or even like sequels or anything like that in future content, I should say. So, yeah, that's just kind of my thought process on that. If you guys are picking up what I'm putting down. And as Morlor says, they think it's more likely that Godfrey was just the first Elden Lord of the Erd Tree. And I would be more on board with that if there was a kind of consistency to the language used to imply that there is a kind of Elden Lord system before the Elden Lords of the Erd Tree. So I don't necessarily think it's completely impossible, but if it was a system, I do think it's different than what we currently have. Right. And yeah, as Cav says there, I kind of fully agree that they think it's plausible that the descriptions of Placidusax could be anachronistically applying the term Elden Lord to describe a ruler who never used that title himself. So that's kind of how I feel about it. So, could first Elden Lord be a title and not referring to chronology? I don't think so. But that's an interesting question. And welcome into the stream, Rex. And as for Cav's question or like statement there about first being capitalized, for anybody who may not be too familiar with the way that Japanese works, there is no real capitalization of like proper nouns or anything like that. So like the equivalent would be using like katakana, but that's mostly just for like loan words or emphasis. One of the examples that I use for what I mean by like emphasis is in One Punch Man. There's a character named Armored Gorilla, and when he first meets Genos and Saitama, he's talking like a robot. And so like the way that the manga represents that is rather than just using like the normal hiragana, which are like these characters right here. This is hiragana. They're kind of like I don't want to say cursive because it's definitely not cursive if you've ever seen like actual Japanese cursive, but they're just kind of like lowercase letters. Katakana is kind of like uppercase letters to a degree, but not like literally. It's just they're two different alphabets that, have the same phonetics. But anyway, getting a bit off topic there. So yeah, the first Elden Lord thing isn't capitalized the same way in Japanese because that's just not how it works. So it's just something that localizers do to make things feel more relevant. So that doesn't mean it doesn't have relevance. It's just it's not quite as definitive as it might seem sometimes. Would I settle for Placidusax being an Elden Lord in all but name? Yes. Global Sequence always considered it to be like history erasure, like how we see so many statues built in front of other statues, etc. The Elden Lord thing. Yes, I think that is a possibility, but with the way that the language is used about the first Elden Lord specifically, it does lead me into taking a hardline stance that what Godfrey is fundamentally different than Placidusax. And there could be any number of reasons for that. One reason could be that because Placidusax is a dragon, he just doesn't have the capability to quote-unquote brandish the Elden Ring the same way that a lord does. So that would be one way we could potentially like reconcile why the two are different. But before the time of Godfrey, I think Placidusax could have essentially been the de facto lord of the land because he was like the biggest badass. Because Godfrey became the biggest badass and he was the lord of the land. So the way that I contextualize a revision of history would be that in the current times where this saying is a saying, the people of the land can't really conceive of the lands between without an Elden Lord. So if there was an Elden Lord before Godfrey, if there was like a big bad before Godfrey, that dude must have been the Elden Lord, because they can't imagine a world without an Elden Lord, because it's just kind of like vital in their minds. So that's kind of the way that I try to reconcile some of these differences of opinion here. It'd be very funny if DLC does revise text like Scholar did. Yeah, and it would be really frustrating. I mean, I wouldn't be entirely surprised, to be honest, because I think the rule of cool trumps all, and like the story is very obviously like second fiddle to gameplay and mechanics, but you know, just keep it real, and it's fun to just entertain the possibilities nonetheless.
Going back to the helm, the Great Tree ornamentation is the Knight Sluria's mark, displayed.
All right, so the thing that I wanted to mention was, at least with the Crucible Knight stuff, I don't think like this description specifically is rewritten, so I just take this at face value. That's kind of the main point that I wanted to take. So that doesn't necessarily mean that Moxie is wrong. It's just that we have like kind of disagreements, or more things I think that need to be considered for me to like be on board with this.
Also by her men, holds the power of the crucible of life, the primordial form. This conveys a dual meaning to me. Also, if the Great Tree was fighting for its life, perhaps there was an incantation cast upon the Great Tree to hold it up. The Halig tree is also weak, so the tree was propped up using structures around it to try and support the tree. So then the biggest question becomes, what happened to the Great Tree?
For the flame to burn the earth tree, a sacrifice is needed of one who envisions the flame.
There's never any mention of who Queen Marika dethroned. The only clear answer right now would be Placidus X's god who fled. The fire giant is a survivor of the war against the giants. Upon realizing the flame of their forge would never die, Queen Marika marked him with a curse. O trifling giant, mayest thou tend thy flame for eternity. The war against the giants. Champions battle. Trolls betray. Fire vanquished. The era of the Erd Tree begins.
Yeah, and that quote is pretty troubling, because the question of exactly when the Erd Tree came to be on the timeline is very contentious, and I'll just leave that alone for now.
The rune of death goes by two names. The other is destined death, the forbidden shadow plucked from the Golden Order upon its creation.
Marika was a well-known scholar and historian, and she learned from history. She knew that every empire falls, so she made a system to circumvent that. Thus,
So Rex asks a good question about, what about the line that he's waiting for his god's return? Are they just assuming that if he was Elden Lord-like, then he must have one? No. So for me personally, I would say that Placidus Axe must have had a god, and he is waiting its return because of the terminology being stated factually and not with hearsay. So I'll go ahead and pull up the remembrance again, just to show you my approach. All right, so where are we at? All right. The Dragon Lord, whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time, is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the Erd Tree, and that is one sentence. So with this being its own like clause, is said to have been Elden Lord, is its own kind of phrase here, and that's the consistent in the Japanese is well. So even though like this is kind of like ends the clause, this clause is bracketed with Toyu, not like literally bracketed, but Toyu modifies the clause that he was like the Erd Lord at that time, it is said. So this whole first part is hearsay, and it's equivalent to the first sentence in English. And then the final fragment here starts off like, but the god was left or fled. It's a little bit vague how this can be interpreted, and Placidusax is awaiting the Lord. So it calls Placidusax Lord here, but it doesn't necessarily call him Elden Lord, potentially. Although you could make the argument that this could be a truncated form of Elden Lord, but this is called the Dragon Lord, so it's very arguable. So anyway, the Lord continues awaiting its return, like the god. So like subjects are dropped. Anyway, to rephrase that in a bit more straightforward English, you could just kind of look back at the actual localization here. It's pretty good. Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to wait its return. So the localizers did a good job here with the Lord, which is kind of equivalent to the way that it's phrased in the Japanese here. It doesn't necessarily say Elden Lord there. It doesn't necessarily say Dragon Lord. It's ambiguous. So they did a very good job of being faithful to the original in this description. So hopefully that answers your question there. You feel like with the dropping of the honorifics and whatnot, it implies that it belongs to the same ambiguity? No? I'm sorry, you're going to have to like rephrase your question with the dropping of honorifics in this. All right, so anyway, let's just go back to the video.
The cycle was born. In order to ensure the cycle would continue, she removed the rune of death. Maybe knowledge from the future cannot be perceived in the past. Melina being burned and bodiless does have its advantages.
All right, so by calling him Lord and not Dragon Lord. So that's not exactly how the honorifics work in the Japanese. I feel like that's a little bit beyond the topic at hand right now to like give a little quick breakdown of honorifics, but it's just different. Like it's not like a loss of honorifics.
She might have been sent back in time by Marika herself to resolve an issue with the Empire that she failed to predict.
For my purpose, given to me by my mother inside the Erd Tree.
Knowing that no leader is perfect, she made the perfect contingency. The fact that she was able to depose her predecessor proved that no leader was perfect. Unlike many tyrants, she learned from others' mistakes. Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. Erd Tree's favor. A talisman depicting a special blessing of the Erd Tree. It is said that when the age of the Erd Tree began, such blessings were personally bestowed upon their recipients by Queen Marika herself. In depictions seen in the Erd Tree Sanctuary and Marika's bedchamber, the Erd Tree is depicted as more round and bushy. Keep this in mind as we move forward.
Oh no.
Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past.
So, if people are born directly from the Erd Tree, that would mean that the Age of Plenty means that people were being born often from the Erd Tree. During this time, Godfrey was the first Elden Lord. The Erd Tree's old sap becomes amber, treasured as the most precious of jewels in the age of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. So, in this case, perhaps God is the one who gives birth based on the vessel and the shape of the Elden Ring. At this point in history, the Elden Ring is depicted as a supple Celtic tree, surely the combination of Godfrey and Marika, with what appears to be detached leaves at the top. This is why there are eras of birth.
And I would disagree that the leaves are detached. There are other depictions which make it be a little bit more conformed with like the rest of the tree and the stump, and I kind of hate the whole great tree grafted stump theory for the fact that it's built off of very terrible foundations, and I'll go into that if Moxie continues down this route, which I'm afraid she will, which I mean, I'm not going to blame her, but anyway, let's go.
For instance, during the Age of the Crucible, there are many births happening that reflect the chaotic nature of the lands between. According to Miyazaki, Elden Ring is the name given to the mysterious concept that defines the world itself. Beings born with horns, tails, and wings. There's the misbegotten and the omen. This Elden Ring is reflective of that chaotic nature, Quote, "The rings that you're looking at in the logo are not so much a representation of those factions, as you put it, but more a representation of the law of the world, the rules, and the order." Then Marika changes the shape of the ring. Different and new births happen because of that. So it is clear, the shape of the Elden Ring changes. If our Tarnished were to speculate, Mohg and Morgott both have great runes they inherited that could have been derived from the Elden Ring that formed before the Age of Plenty.
So I think one question to ask ourselves is, if Marika changed the shape of the ring, when was this and what were the consequences of that? And she might go into this in more detail in a little bit. So I'll just leave that question open-ended for now.
There's not a lot of information about this era. Nox heresy allegedly happened in this era. Estelle is also either summoned by the Greater Will or the Nox and blows shit up. According to Quelaag, it's a big-ass mystery. Godwin is born in this era. He defeats Fortisax. What's important is that they form a friendship out of mutual respect, and the dragon cult forms.
And so when Godwin is born is technically vague. I do think it's possible he could have been the firstborn child between Godfrey and Marika, potentially before the age of the Erd Tree, and that might be what differentiates him specifically from Mohg and Morgott being Omen, and potentially influenced by the Erd Tree, blending things together a bit more. Howdy says, Estella's 100% a Nox experiment gone wrong, and V-Libit's video sold you on that? Okay, cool. The only consequence we know of Marika interfering with the order of the world is removing death. And yeah, that's kind of the implication that I'm going for. Of course, there could have been a bit more to it than just removing death, but that is like the one thing we know of as far as the composition of the Elden Ring changing. I would go so far as to argue that I think Radigan also canonically altered the shape of the ring with the inclusion of his quote-unquote Elden Rune into it, according to the Source Seal and Scar Seal that he has, and that the kind of latticed web of weird type structure behind the ring itself originally comes from Radigan, and that, of course, could be argued to have been like a pruning of what may have been before it, with all the roots of the Elden Ring depiction that you might find in Farum Azula, but of course it's all arguable.
Something that goes unnoticed by many in the community is that the shape of the Elden Ring changes in this era. It's subtle, but it's clearly defined within the shackles that bind the royal Omen brothers. A fetish bathed in golden magic. Shackles were used to bind the accursed people called the Omen, and these ones were made to keep a particular Omen under the strictest confinement.
And so that would be one of the examples that I would say that I don't think that it shows that like the limbs are disconnected from the Erd Tree, and that maybe not like disconnected from the roots. So they're kind of got the same symbolism going on as the bottom. So I think it's a selective reading to say that the tops of the tree is different than the bottom. And, you know, that's arguable as well, as everything is.
And these ones were made to keep a particular Omen under the strictest confinement. Though faint, the shackles still retain vestiges of power, enough to trap the once-bound Margit on Earth, if only for a short time. Marika's time as an Elden Lord should have come to an end, but she continues to reign for yet another cycle. There appears to be another form of the Elden Ring depicted on the highways connecting the Eternal Cities.
And that's the one that bothers me
This
the
represents
most.
some kind of power struggle to me. Marika, having reigned for 2 cycles, meant someone had to challenge her. I think that challenger was the Glow-Eyed Queen.
All right, and so this... Oh, okay, she says, however. I'll stop.
However, she is felled by Malekith.
Okay, so I think this is where Moxie has like a maybe the first or like full-on second contradiction to what she has said earlier, because she opened the video by saying like the Glow-Eyed Queen was always defeated, but now the Glow-Eyed Queen is appearing to challenge Marika. So maybe Moxie is talking about a specific point on the timeline earlier than she really means to be, and she just like didn't set that up. I'll give her like, you know, a little bit of a benefit of doubt, but I am going to be my normal pedantic self here. Wait, Marika's reign is Elden Lord? I think Moxie is just speaking a bit loosely here, and she's incorporating Godfrey and Radigan's time as like Marika's time controlling the Elden Ring and as like the de facto Elden Lord. So yeah, technically she is wrong for saying that, but that's something that it's pretty forgivable for me, just because like I understand what she means to say, whereas like what I'm like commenting on now with the whole Gek thing, I think that is a bit more contradictory and isn't just like a slip of the tongue or like a slip of the mind or whatever. If the modification of the Elden Ring corresponds to the gods taking of an Elden Lord, that helps give some explanation for the function of a Lord, which seems very important, but isn't clear why. Yeah, and so my opinion, and you know, this is my headcanon, and I want to be very clear about that, is the Elden Lord must likely like modify the Elden Ring and or repair it. I do think like the Age of Fracture is very unsatisfying for a lot of reasons, but I don't know. Anyway, that's just kind of what I take it. I think Godfrey did something to like create the Erd Tree with the Elden Ring, and Radigan bound the stars and the fate in the night skies when he became Elden Lord and took control of the Elden Ring.
Decides to change the shape of the Elden Ring, removing the Rune of Death.
Destined death.
Malekith was betrayed by Queen Marika, making Malekith the vessel for the Rune of Death. And so the Golden Order begins. Quote, a superior...
Let me back that up, because I think she said it a certain way that I didn't address earlier in the video, because it's kind of an annoying thing to address, but I just want to like double check to, yeah.
However, she is felled by Malekith. Marika decides to change the shape of the Elden Ring, removing the Rune of Death.
Destined death.
Malekith was betrayed by Queen Marika, making Malekith the vessel for the Rune of Death. And so the Golden Order begins. Quote, a superior...
Okay, so maybe... I've got a lot to say, but I want to be sure I'm on the right track with what Moxie is saying. So I think she may have like not set up the timeline properly, but I'm not sure. Like there's a lot of moving parts with this.
Incantation of Erd Tree worship. In the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erd Tree, but through countless victories in war, it became an embodiment of order. It's important to note, Radagon and Rennala married not that long after the Golden Order had formed, and had Ranni, Rykard, and Radahn. Then Radagon studied Glintstone at the Academy. Radagon abandoned Rennala, then went back to the capital and married Marika. Once again, we see the shape of the Elden Ring reflective of new law. After this, fundamentalism took hold. Thus, Miquella and Melina are born. The Night of Black Knives occurs.
Yeah, so I think like I don't want to say like this is an issue, but I feel like the timeline she's presenting is truncated, and I'm not sure if she is making faulty conclusions based off of flawed premises here, or if she's just not being as clear about the timeline as I would like her to be. So I'm just kind of like struggling here. I want to rewatch the last like minute and a half or so just to like absorb it a bit more fully.
And these ones were made to keep a particular omen under the strictest confinement. Though faint, the shackles still retained vestiges of power, enough to trap the once bound Margit on Earth, if only for a short time. Marika's time as an Elden Lord should have come to an end.
Hey Tyler, welcome to the stream. And howdy, I don't think I said hey to you.
There appears to be another form of the Elden Ring depicted on the highways connecting the Eternal Cities.
I backed up too far.
This represents some kind of power struggle to me. Marika, having reigned for 2 cycles, meant someone had to challenge her. I think that challenger was the Glowmite Queen. However...
Okay, so definitely after 2 cycles is when the Gek appears, which is... That just cannot be for many reasons, and I'll probably get into the nitty-gritty about that shortly here.
She is felled by Malekith. Marika decides to change the shape of the Elden Ring, removing the Rune of Death.
Destined death.
Malekith was betrayed by Queen Marika, making Malekith the vessel for the Rune of Death.
So the way she said that there, I do think it's kind of misinformed, because the Rune of Death should have been removed well before the end of Marika's reign. Like, it should have been removed either arguably when Godfrey became Elden Lord or when Radagon became Elden Lord. And I don't want to get into all of that because, that's... yeah, anyway.
And so the Golden Order begins. Quote,
So the Golden Order beginning is either with the beginning of Godfrey or Golden Order fundamentalism, more specifically with Radagon, which is kind of what I just said.
a superior incantation of Erdtree worship. In the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erdtree, but through countless victories in war, it became an embodiment of order.
And so that quote right there is interesting because it talks about the Erdtree specifically, and while it is a very natural inclination to want to conflate the Erdtree and the Golden Order, there is enough ambiguity to say that they might not be the one and the same, despite, obviously the ghost outside of all Leyndell saying that the Erdtree is the heart of the Golden Order. I don't think that's wrong, but there could be a difference between the Erdtree of the time of the Golden Order or the time of Radagon and a difference in the form of the Erdtree during Godfrey's reign. And just to contextualize that a bit further for those who may disagree with me, even though I don't necessarily believe in the Great Tree, one could also make the argument the Great Tree could be another form of the Erdtree. Not like the actual Erdtree, but just like the idea of the Erdtree before it was the Erdtree. So anyway, my point is the form of the tree or the function of it could have changed depending on the age, is kind of the real takeaway there. So Great Tree isn't necessarily the Golden Order tree, but yeah, anyway, hopefully that was clear enough.
It's important to note, Radagon and Rennala married not that long after the Golden Order had formed, and had Ranni.
So she thinks the Golden Order is before Radagon and Rennala. Okay, so that is perfectly fine, except for that to happen, the Golden Order is established, which means the Glowmide Queen is already defeated, or that the Glowmide Queen cannot challenge Marika, because the Rune of Death should have already been sealed for the Golden Order to exist. So that's
Rykard,
consistent.
Then Radagon studied Glintstone at the Academy. Radagon abandoned Rennala, then went back to the capital and married Marika. Once again, we see the shape of the Elden Ring reflective of new law. After this, fundamentalism took hold.
And I agree with that Radagon changed the Elden Ring, and that's where we get Golden Order fundamentalism. I'm of the opinion that's when the Golden Order itself is created, and fundamentalism isn't really a different thing, really, but anyway.
Thus, Miquella and Melina are born. The Night of Black Knives occurs, and Ranni admits,
I stole the Rune of Death, slew mine own Empyrean flesh, casting it away. I would not be controlled by that thing.
The final form of the Elden Ring is forged in the Shattering, according to Marika's hammer, stone hammer made in the lands of the Newman, outside the lands between, the tool with which Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring, and Radagon attempted to repair it. The hammer partially broke upon shattering the ring, becoming splintered with rune fragments. There's also rune fragments found all over the lands between, which reads, a shard of the shattered Elden Ring grants a blessing of an equipped great rune upon use. It is said that the lower arc of the Elden Ring received its bounty, and this is a shard of one such arc. Finally, of course, our tarnished brandishes and reforges the Elden Ring to bring in a new age. Quote, fundamentalism describes the Golden Order through the powers of regression and causality. Regression is the pool of meaning that all things yearn to eternally converge. There are 7 different forms the Elden Ring takes, perhaps even 8 if you count the one on the roads connecting the Eternal Cities. The Elden Ring gets smaller and smaller until it is shattered and reforged. There is a possibility that the Elden Ring we are presented with were torn from the base of the Elden Ring in Malkuth's boss chamber. There is no denying that this Elden Ring did exist. So then what is required to reforge the Elden Ring into a new shape?
So, one way to deny that this Elden Ring exists is that even though this does look, I think, identical in some ways to the Crossroads Royal Highway style Elden Ring, where it has like the four equidistant rings in the center, the concept art makes it look a little bit different in that it's really just like the main three ones. And so maybe for like the actual in-game asset, this one is just a little bit brighter than it needed to have been. And the three up here are still kind of in a triangular pattern rather than like a diamond shape, which is more consistent with like Godfrey's time. So there could be arguments made. Potentially we'll get more answers with the DLC. Hopefully we do, but don't hold your breath is what I can say with some amount of confidence there. Was that the Elden Ring inside Placidus Axe? No, so I think you're just talking about like the little nebula that we looked at a second ago. I think that was just from the inside of the Elden Beast. Okay.
So then what is required to reforge the Elden Ring into a new shape? Heat. There is a missing piece of contextual evidence here. Occam's razor. Marika went to the forge for the same reason our Tarnished did. To brandish the Elden Ring and reforge it to bring the Age of Plenty. Remember how Marika went to the mountaintops of the giants and felled their god? I believe one of her goals during this era was to capture the flame and embody it into a demigod.
I don't necessarily know about embodying it into a demigod, but I don't necessarily disagree with the idea that Marika may have needed to take the giant's flame to either actually create her era of the Erd Tree or do something with it. But there's just a lot of open-endedness within that section of the timeline where it's very unclear whether or not the Erd Tree actually existed during the war against the giants or whether it was actually like born during that time or like a little bit of both, where like it got born, then the giants like rebelled against it, and then Marika like fought back with Godfrey and then they won. It's just too open-ended. Answers with the DLC that hasn't happened since Artorias of the Abyss. Honestly, like Bloodborne, even though I don't like a lot of the story beats of its DLC, it does answer quite a lot of questions. And at the very least, like if you want to compare like Bloodborne's DLC situation to Elden Ring, you might be able to say like Lawrence is kind of like the equivalent of the Glowmide Queen, where you kind of get hints at what or who he was, but not really. And then the DLC, kind of sort of answers it more, but not really. So I'm sure even if certain things get answered, it's probably just as likely to raise more questions. But at least for now, like these are the things that I want them to answer. So can't help that. You meant like the Elden Ring in the arena. So yeah, that could have been like the Elden Ring as it was depicted during the time of Placidus Axe. Yes. No, I like Bloodborne's story. I don't like aspects of the DLC because I think they retcon things which I consider to be more interesting based on the cut content of Bloodborne in like the pre-alpha state.
A tree governs all.
There was also the shape of the Elden Ring, 4 rings but rearranged differently. This is depicted on one of the highways connecting the Eternal Cities. It's clearly different from the shape of the Elden Ring on the front of the Erd Tree. Given the iconography around the Eternal Cities and the taboo of those who live in death, I speculate that this Elden Ring was what the Glowmide Queen intended, but it never came to be. The same can be said for what I believe to be Mikla's intended shape for the Elden Ring, which combines characteristics from both his mother and his father. Remember, it was Marika's goal that everyone knew that she was the one true god. So, for this process to take place, heat must be applied. As so brilliantly noted by Tarnished archaeologists in his 3 creeds of the Erd Tree, a thick layer of ash already covers Lindell. the traveler's clothes, worn by a young woman who set off into the world to confront their fate. Notice the leatherwork on the belt. It's Celtic. It was once thought that blessed sap of the Erd tree would drip from its boughs forever, but that age of plenty swiftly came to a close, and with time, the Erd tree became more of an object of faith. The incantations Melina cast brandished the seal from the age of plenty. Smoldering butterfly, an eternally burning butterfly found near the wildfires and elsewhere, material used for crafting items, serves as kindling for a number of items. Melina's eyes are solid gold. Zuli the witch recently examined textures of eyes. The only others to have full golden eyes are Godric the Golden and his offspring, the last of the golden lineage.
Make of thyselves that which ye desire. Be it a lord, be it a god, share them with me. Your thoughts, your ambitions, the principles you would follow.
And so this is like one of the harder things to parse with Melina, because if you want to go with the eye angle, you can relate her to the time of Godfrey. If you want to go with the butterfly angle, you would relate her more to Mikola and Melania. But of course, like, the butterflies don't necessarily mean that like she had to have been born at the same time as those two. But anyway, moving on forward.
The Erd tree was once perfect and eternal, and thus it was believed that the Erd tree's seeds could not exist. Usually, he causes seeds to disperse in plants in nature, hence the description for the golden seed. A golden seed found at the base of an illusory tree. When the Elden Ring was shattered, these seeds flew from the Erd tree, scattering across the various lands, as if life itself knew that its end has come. Marika could have burned her competition, making way for an entirely different tree, the Erd tree, an illusory tree that cannot be burnt. This is also evident in the questions being posed within the description of Golden Rune 3. Grace that dwells within the inhabitants of the lands between, the lingering trace of gold. Even now, runes are still imbued with the power of life itself. Do you see the Erd tree towering over there? Why pose the question if it does not imply another meaning by the subtext? The subtext behind the question is, some people do not see the Erd tree itself.
I hate that line of thought. I don't even really want to address it because I've addressed it before, but generally, I think that's just kind of really contradicted in things like Muriel talking about seeing the Erd tree in view of Rhea Lucaria. Even though she's blind, the finger reader crone right outside of Langdell asks if you see the Erd tree towering over, or she doesn't like say it like that way. She doesn't like ask if you see it. She's like, yeah. Anyway, besides that, there's like a ton of pictures of the Erd tree in its kind of like quote unquote, what do they call it? Phantom form. So if it is a phantom Erd tree, like, certainly a ton of people see it. So I tend to look at the Golden Rune 3 description as a rhetorical device. I don't think it's meant to be like a literal question, like, oh, do you actually see the Erd tree? No, I think it's there. Also, to go along with that, the Erd tree and the top portion of it burn when you use the special fire, but of course it might be special fire. Setting that aside, we see the leaves of the Erd tree falling at night, and you might make the argument that there's some weird like time stuff going on, like that the leaves always fall, but they never really fall. Like they kind of like, I don't want to say like paracausal, but like they're stuck in a stasis where they fall from the tree, but the leaves don't never actually fall, if that makes sense. So it's a magic tree. Like, we can come up with so many answers for what we want to like fit in there. But anyway, going back to what somebody had said in the chat, Without Horns asked, speaking of Celtic or Celtic adjacent things, what do you think of Erd ERD being like Erd URD? I think it's extremely likely. Apparently, I don't know if Elden, like, I don't know whether it's a case of like, you know, quote unquote English first or like Japanese first. Because as far as like the Japanese goes, the Erd tree is always called the golden tree, and they never like really use like Erude. So like, hold on, let's pull this up again. So Placidusax, we call him the Erude no. So like Erude is Erd, so it's like the Erd Lord, but you don't really get Erude no Ki, so like no Erd tree. So it's kind of weird, and I don't entirely know what to make of it. Is it a Miyazaki-ism? Is it a Martinism? It's very arguable, but good question. Bach also asks that question. He doesn't really ask it like literally. It's a rhetorical device. The fact that the leaves affect you physically is also evidence of it being real. So yeah, I think the Erd tree is real and it's visible to pretty much everybody who looks at it. Absolutely sounds like a Martinism. It could be like a little bit of both, where like Martin came up with the idea to like so in my absolute headcanon of like part of the development of Elden Ring, I'm sure one of the biggest, maybe not like complaints, but one of like the easiest things to like miss out on in terms of like having an open world area is how much of the actual screen space would be taken up by the sky and to have nothing like super visually interesting going on there. So what would be a couple ways to make a skybox more interesting by having like towering things up there? So, okay, towering things. What do we have? We have mountains, we have clouds, we have stars. Things like that are certain ways to make skyboxes appear more distinct. We also have things like planets and moons, all that stuff. So I think one of the brilliant aspects of Elden Ring is that one of the ways they figured out they could fill out the skybox a bit more was through gigantic trees, which are incorporated into the mythology or metaphysiology of the world, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I don't know whether or not Miyazaki had an idea of trees to like help fill out that negative space, and then George R. R. Martin gave the reason as to like why the trees were significant, or if the trees were like a Miyazaki idea first to a degree, and with like the whole Erd tree thing, like a world tree like Yggdrasil, that kind of idea, and then George just like gave his little spin on it. So I just don't really know, but I wouldn't be surprised at either situation being true, whether it was a Miyazaki first or a Martin first kind of situation. He exclaims that he can see it only once you're in the capital. So I will be honest, and I think that's a very selective reading of what Bach is saying here. I'll go ahead and pull up his dialogue because I'm not going to say like you're completely wrong here. Like it's true, he asks if you can see it, but I think the difference is the way that he's talking about seeing the tree there is that he's seeing it up close for the first time, and he's really marveling at its splendor. And of course, you might want to make the argument like, well, why doesn't he say it when you're like in Altus Plateau? That's a good question. I don't have like the best of answers for it, but I do think it's just him being excited, and I don't think it's meant to be taken literally, considering the other context of others seeing the Erd tree in the case of like Muriel. And I know that there's like a thread on Reddit where they talk about it, and I might just pull that up to just give a bit more counter arguments for this rather than just me like relying on the first couple. So hold on. Let me see. So this isn't like organized the best. I may as well like look for it on screen so you guys can follow along. Let me look at chat real quick. Yeah, okay. So he talks about like lords and stuff. Maybe I should like search for Erd tree here, but I'm afraid it's just gonna like take it would take me to the very top. All right. the Golden Needle. That should still be in Liurnia, although it's not. Please become Elden Lord. Okay. Wait. Not really. Oh, okay, here we go. So, okay, he's like, have you seen it? Yeah, so that's pretty close. That golden tree. I can't really say super well. Yeah, so dazzling, that's a good word for it. He's been moved. Felt something stir. Yeah, so like he sees it, but like in my opinion, Bach, the reason why Bach is moved is because he's seeing it up close and personal. Like it's different than like seeing pictures of something like the Grand Canyon is a bit different than like actually going up to the canyon and seeing it. And I think that's kind of like a similar experience as like when you see the Erd tree from a distance versus like when you get up close. So of course that is my headcanon perspective on it. You're free to disagree, but likewise, I also disagree with those who disagree with me. You agree it can go either way? Okay. Not an actual question. Yeah, that's kind of how I look at it. You can't see the giant ass tree, check your ping. Something like that. They need to use the telescope so that way like loads in properly. It's this whole thing. You mean down to the canyon? No, like even if you're just like up, at the ridge and just like looking down, it's different. Like experiencing it firsthand versus like from a distance, whether that be like a literal distance or a metaphorical one. Like I couldn't imagine the difference between like seeing Everest from the base versus like experiencing it from the summit. And maybe that's not like the best example. Maybe like looking at Everest from like a plane versus actually experiencing it from the summit. Yeah, okay. It looks like you guys are following along, so hate to kind of like beat a dead horse about that. And I felt like there was something else that I want to talk about. Oh yeah, maybe yeah, let me double check like the Reddit post. Um see the Erd tree. Because this idea never like really occurred to me until I think I saw TA's video about it, and then I like looked into it a bit more. So thanks to Miata07 on the Elden Ring Lore Talk subreddit, they've compiled a couple things. So the Golden Rune 3 says, do you see the Erd tree towering over? Finger Reader Crone, surely you see it too. So I think that's a rhetorical device. Bach, we just talked about that. And so I don't think the Patches dialogue is like the best one, but Patches says, I spoke no lie, not a one. You were trapped inside a volcano, no mistake. But the Erd tree was right outside. You just had to spring yourself out, in his typical Patches way. I actually don't know if this is still in the game. Or like, I don't know if this is like cut. At the very least, I haven't triggered it, and that's kind of like my fault. Anyway. This line implies the Erd tree can be commonly seen, even all the way from Mount Gelmir. And then, of course, naysayers will say, like, oh, well, like, Tarnished can see it. Then, okay, there's Raya. So, brave Tarnished, seek the Altus Plateau, the realm of the Erd tree. Most Tarnished are doomed to wander the outskirts of the lands between, peering wistfully at the towering Erd tree. And, of course, that's still, like, related to Tarnished. Then we've got the Muriel dialogue, which I mentioned. And then, of course, we have Gold Mask staring at it, but some people say that, like, he's, like, an adherent to the Golden Order, so he believes in it. This one, okay, so there's not, like, a ton of conclusive evidence. Oh, and then the cut content of, like, Godric's poem, so yeah, I won't count that. And then Alban orcs are untouched by the Erd tree's grace. That doesn't really say anything about like the visibility of it, but nonetheless, we have so many paintings of the Erd tree that I feel like it's pretty clear that it exists. Also, all of like the headless statues on top of the catacombs, they're all pointed towards the Erd tree, which might have been a little bit more difficult, but not impossible if it didn't exist. But of course, I guess some people would argue that's when it was like the physical Erd tree, not the spiritual one. But anyway, we've definitely gone off. the subject long enough.
According to all these contextual clues, the Erd Tree burned during the Shattering. So this is when we get the last depiction of the Elden Ring.
And obviously saying the Erd Tree burned during the Shattering is something that I disagree with the principle of like the first burning of the Erd Tree being the Shattering one, and I have vehement disagreements with Tarnished Archaeologist about that, and yeah, I'll just leave that there.
Marika is stabbed through the womb with what appears to be a fragment of the Rune of Death. Marika, being depicted in this way, paints a clear picture. She has been punished by the greater will for her actions, and the consequence is that she can no longer give birth. However, I think there was another consequence to this action.
It happened during the golden age of the Erd Tree, long
here we
before
go.
the shattering of the Elden Ring. Someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith.
Later, the Rune of Death spread across the lands between through the underground roots of the Great Tree, sprouting in the form of Deathroot. Deathroot was the greater will's way of achieving balance, through a coup carried out by Marika's own children. This is where Melina comes in. Melina is implied through the internal game files to be the daughter of Queen Marika. This is supplementary at best. However, consider what Melina has to say when taken to the foot of the Erd Tree.
I have to ascertain for myself the reason for which I live, burned and bodiless.
If she was a demigod or even an Empyrean, then perhaps her two fingers reside within the Round Table Hold. It is her that takes you to the Round Table Hold, after all. I believe that Melina served as kindling for Marika to forge the new shape of the Elden Ring. Melina burned the Great Tree, which belonged to Placidus X, and his god who fled. The Erd Tree forms from a husk of what was left of the Great Tree, and the Elden Ring, during the Age of the Crucible. And again, she would have been used during the Shattering.
I was born at the foot of the Erd Tree.
Melina could have been the first demigod conceived, as a sacrifice to burn the Great Tree and reforge the Elden Ring.
Burned and bodiless.
Burning her firstborn child is what brought her power. So when standing at the mountaintops of the giants, it becomes clear that this was the purpose given to Melina.
I shall see to the kindling.
She would have been the eldest of Mohg and Morgoth. Perhaps she...
So there's this kind of stuff is hard to talk about because sometimes it's like you got the right answer, but like the way you showed your math is completely wrong. So not to say that that is like verbatim the case is what's going on with like Moxie right here is she might be correct with some of these overall theories here. We don't really know, but with some of the other issues that I've had with the supporting evidence for the theory, it makes it hard to approach the conversation because there's just kind of a misalignment of perspectives to begin with. And so we're missing like the common ground to really hash out some of the details, I think, because of what I would consider like differences of opinion or like mistakes on Moxie's part. And of course, like some of these aren't necessarily her fault. She didn't really go into detail about like the golden age of the Erd Tree with Roger's dialogue, which is fine. Apparently this is arguably an issue of translation, but like the golden age of the Erd Tree isn't necessarily a reference to the Age of Plenty, which many people have like taken it to mean that. And part of the reason for that is like in the Japanese, Roger calls it like the age of the ancient Erd Tree or like the old Erd Tree, something like that. But golden age means something maybe a bit more specific to like English speakers of the game who've like read the text and like gotten a misinterpretation based on the specific language used. So I think there was something else with that sentence where it's like long ago, golden age of the Erd Tree. Let me like look that up. Because I know this has come up in Crunchy's server and like we've talked about it like a couple different times. Golden age. Okay, here we go. Oops. All right. Yeah, it happened during the golden age of the Erd Tree, long before the shattering of the Elden Ring. Someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death. Okay, that's not too important. Oh, well, I guess it just kind of all runs on. So, someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, the Black Blade, and on a bitter night murdered Godwin the Golden. That was the first recorded death of a demigod in all history, and it became the catalyst. Soon, the Elden Ring was smashed, and thus sprang forth the war known as the Shattering. So, because of the way like this runs on in English, some people think that the Elden Ring was shattered in the golden age of the Erd Tree, I guess, but I've never read it that way myself. But what this is trying to say, and it's a little bit clearer in the Japanese, is that in the ancient, like, prosperous period of the Erd Tree, which does obviously sound a lot like the Age of Abundance, but the vocabulary used is different. So the way that I like reconcile this is that this is just like Roger's understanding of the events. He isn't necessarily talking about the Age of Ancients, not Age of Ancients, Age of Abundance specifically, but to him in a post-shattering world, the time before the shattering may seem more ancient and a lot more prosperous than things are now. So I don't think like Roger is like lying or anything like that. I think he's just slightly misunderstanding, maybe not like misunderstanding. It's just like, I think the players are misunderstanding like where Roger is coming from. So I don't think like he's giving us misinformation. I think just people are misinterpreting it a bit. So he stole blah, blah, blah. And then what was the issue? Oh yeah, soon. Yeah, so there is like no soon. It just says like killing Godwin essentially, or like Godwin's death was the trigger that caused the Shattering War, I guess. Uh-oh. Am I still online? Let me look. Apparently, okay. Okay, guys, ads are running in 10 seconds, so I'll stop like talking about this for a little bit so you guys can like hear everything. So I'll just like waffle a little bit, maybe play it a bit more. Stop? Or is it more lore? What if the tree imagery in Farum is the Helfin? Oh yeah, that's possible. Okay. So what was I doing? Oh yeah, we're talking about Roger. Oh yeah, I just need to like maybe do this. Oh, never mind. It's fine. All right, I'm gonna go back to the video briefly here and then like go back.
Cannot remember her purpose because every time she is used as kindling, she loses her memory. So it is here that we learn why Melina eternally smolders and how she rekindled the revolution.
All right, that seems like a decent like pausing point. So, right. The Roger thing is just like a couple of small issues which led to big misunderstandings, I guess. So, the shattering happened after Radagon, which means the Rune of Death had to have already been removed, not necessarily sealed, and that's another big issue which people get tripped up on, and I don't blame them for. So, the removal of the Rune of Death is different than the confinement of the Rune of Death, in that removing the Rune of Death means it got removed from the Elden Ring, and that's what started the Golden Order. So that is like the prerequisite that needs to happen for Ranni to steal a piece of the Rune of Death, which has been removed from the Elden Ring, to kill Godwin. And then after Godwin dies, Malekith's like, oh no, I screwed up. Somebody stole a fragment of the Rune of Death. So now, if I seal the blade of the Rune of Death within me, no one will be able to steal it again. So the sealing of the Rune of Death is different than the removal of the Rune of Death. But the English makes it all like sound like confinement. Although Enya does says like the shadow plucked from the Elden Ring. So there is that, but they also use similar language in English at least. So it sounds more similar than it actually is. The ceiling is also different from the ceiling of the blade. Yeah, that is a point of contention. Everything's a point of contention. Let's be real here. So yeah, I might need to like just make a straight up video about that. Like I thought I've covered it before, but it's a pervasive issue for a lot of people apparently. All right, going back to the video now. I lied. So yeah, the issue I think that Moxie is having is believing in Tarnished Archaeologist a bit too readily when his timeline is just really bad in my opinion. Because he puts the Shattering like before the Age of Radagon. Like so he puts the Shattering at the end of the Age of Abundance, which means it's before Radagon's time, which doesn't make any damn sense because Radagon needs to have had the Carian children to be able to even kill Godwyn to trigger the Shattering. Like it's just bad.
Hello again, old friend.
So let's speculate on the expansion. I think that Melina will be the one to greet us again, especially if it happens in the past. I was unfamiliar with other Miyazaki games until going down a rabbit hole and finding Quelaag, who does awesome lore deep dives on her channel. Miyazaki likes to time travel, so I believe that Melina will greet our Tarnished once again. Taking a note from Quelaag here, this time we will be participating in the Crucible era. It would be interesting to see the events that led up to how Marika came into power. I think that Melina will have a major role in the story, and her identity will be revealed more certainly. The general community consensus is that the expansion image is depicting Miquella. Here are some details that have drawn my attention about Miquella. The Haley tree radiates silver and gold. There are silver sparkles constantly flowing through the air. I think initially it is meant to give more of a feeling like our Tarnished is breathing a mold. However, I see this as a mirror to the gold that emanates from the lands between. The red leaves of the Haley tree also harken back to the Crucible era. Finally, I really want to know what is behind this door, and I think Melina will be the one to help our Tarnished find out. I am new to the Souls community, and I am a baby that was badly whooped by the hands of Shigeru Miyamoto himself for just wanting a story. I played Elden Ring in anticipation for Tears of the Kingdom, and when the game got delayed, I immersed myself deeply in the lands between. From what I understand of the Souls universe, games don't really connect, but they could. For now, I will explore the lands between. I follow many other creators in this space, including the works of Smoketown, Tarnished Archaeologist, Ziostorm, Latividia, Square Table Gaming, and so many more talented creators. The lore community feels inviting, so consider myself invested. So, if you made it this far, and you like Elden Ring or other gaming lore, consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a like, and engaging with my ever-growing community. Thank you so much to the supporters of the channel. I really couldn't do this without you. I have a Patreon if you'd like to help support the channel. It would mean a lot. Your support is what keeps this channel going. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
How he keeps saying she didn't at me. It's fine. She obviously made this video before I think she talked to me, or maybe not. Either way, I don't really like mind if she didn't at me. My ego isn't big enough to like feel like, oh, every creator needs to know me. No, I mean, my real concern is just like having good lore. It doesn't necessarily have to come from me. I do enjoy engaging with the community, and I think when we all can like kind of openly critique each other's works and like not take it too personally, it just kind of helps us all improve as a collective. And if like the whole floor gets risen, then we'll all be better off in terms of like our lore analyses. So anyway, despite obviously having some pretty big disagreements with Moxie, I did enjoy the video. I appreciate the very candid nature of her saying like she's new to the series and all this stuff like that. I thought it was edited really well and stuff like that. So now the next part is just to make all of my opinions her opinions, so you guys get the real lore. But no, in all seriousness, yeah, I appreciated that. So I'm going to go ahead and link this one into chat. If you guys want to go ahead and drop Moxie a like and or a sub, I'm sure she would be very appreciative. So we've definitely gone a lot more over time than I anticipated. So tomorrow, at the very least, we will continue off with Understanding Queen Marika with Cosmos's video. Then we will probably go into Dark Souls lore, Will, Duty, and Suffering by Wenders. And then I'll need to go back through my backlog of videos that I should have added to my list, but I haven't done that yet. So the next videos, I'm not entirely sure of what they'll be, but we'll have some for tomorrow as well. Maybe the parallels between Dark Souls and Buddhism by Noxcast. That would be a fun one. I've thought about making... I'll just leave that idea now. So yeah, that could be a fun one for tomorrow as well. Have I reacted to any of Shatani's videos on stream? I don't think so. She mostly does Sekiro lore, which is maybe not like lore, but like translation stuff. But I'm just not that super interested in that game specifically, just because it seems like really, I don't want to say like really straightforward, just super linear. Yeah, it is kind of straightforward and linear and a little bit dissatisfying to me, just because it's like a little bit convoluted between the interfactional conflicts, I think. So anyway, that'll be it for tonight's stream. Thank you all for joining me, especially with the holidays going on. I appreciate that. We will be going live again, later today, depending on your time zone, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So hopefully we'll have you all there on the next one. And if not, I understand. And hopefully you will have a good day, week, and or year or longer if I don't see you again. Till the next time, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.